Chapter 1100. The corridor was quiet and dark. The old wooden floorboards creaked under his feet. The air was filled with a suffocating shadow aura. As he got closer and closer to the core of darkness, Grimm's flame aura was greatly suppressed. It could only extend half a meter out of his body, barely enough to protect his body and clothes. In Grimm's eyes, the corridor in front of him was comparable to a haunted house. Strands and strands of shadowy energy drifted out from the second room on the left, slowly floating in the corridor. As the shadow aura was too dense, these strange shadows seemed to show signs of coming to life. They wriggled and floated in the narrow corridor, constantly twisting into all kinds of strange shapes. From afar, they seemed like terrifying demons that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as they waited for their prey to come knocking on their door. As soon as Grimm stepped into the dark corridor, the shadow closest to him suddenly turned into a huge mouth full of sharp teeth, biting at him fiercely. Grimm snorted lightly. His right hand that was wrapped in flames shot out like lightning and pierced into the strange mouth. No matter how hard the other party bit and grinded, it was unable to penetrate the flame barrier and hurt his arm in the slightest. Grimm's hand explored the inside of the strange mouth for a while. When he suddenly retracted his hand, there was a dark and shiny black crystal in his palm. After losing the black crystal, the strange mouth roared crazily for a moment before vanishing into thin air. Grimm raised the black crystal in front of his eyes and the I chip quickly projected its basic information. Name, Shadow Fragment Type, Dark Energy Crystal Item Rank, Level 1 Usage, Enchantment, can be used to add shadow damage to weapons. Alchemy, Basic Material for Dark Magic Equipment. Alchemy, necessary material for magic potions that defend against shadow damage. Summoning, basic material for summoning shadow creatures. Special usage, can be used to synthesize shadow crystals. 100 shadow fragments can be converted into a shadow crystal through an alchemy ritual. There were many other uses of the shadow fragments, but Grimm was not in the mood to pay attention to them. It was just a Tier 1 sorcerer material. It was not worth it for him to spend too much effort on it. Grimm threw the shadow fragment into his storage ring and prepared to move on. Perhaps sensing the strength of the newcomer, these naturally catalyzed large clusters of shadows quickly gathered together, condensing into a strange shadow creature that was only the size of a dwarf. Its entire body was pitch black, and its facial features and body could not be seen clearly. The moment it appeared, a treacherous, unpredictable, and terrifying aura emanated from its body. The AI chip's urgent warning sounded in Grimm's mind. Beep. Level 4 Shadow Creatures Energy Waves detected. Initial analysis indicates that it is a shadow assassin. Its threat to the host has reached the dangerous level. Please remain vigilant. So fast? Grimm was slightly startled and his gaze fell on the door behind the shadow creature. Even if the Dark Witch Shunny was a sorcerer god, it was impossible for her to create a Tier 4 shadow creature in such a short time. Unless there was some kind of abnormally powerful shadow treasure in the dark core, it was impossible to achieve this by relying on human strength alone. If they really had treasures or tools of this level, why didn't they just use them against him? Could it be that there were restrictions on its usage, or was it purely a support item? Grimm scanned the strange creature that was rapidly forming in front of him, quickly analyzing and determining the secrets of the room. He was about to face the Dark Witch, so how could he gain the upper hand on the battlefield and see through the enemy's trump cards? This was what a high-ranked magus should do at the start of a battle. However, there was not much time left for Grimm to think and analyze. Within the room, the strange energy waves from the dark core were getting stronger and clearer. No matter what terrifying attack the enemy was preparing or what powerful creature she was summoning, Grimm did not have the obligation to gentlemanly wait for her to finish. Hence, at this moment, no matter what kind of enemy stood in his way, Grimm had to flatten them with lightning speed and disrupt the Dark Witch's plan. Thinking of this, Grimm took a step forward without hesitation. The fire dragon pendant on his neck flashed red, and a terrifying stream of flames shot out from his mouth, covering the entire dark corridor in a fan shape. Of course, this included the newly catalyzed Dark Shadow Assassin. When the terrifying stream of flames broke through the barrier of darkness and swept past the surroundings of the Dark Shadow Assassin, the Dark Shadow Assassin strangely disappeared. Yes, it disappeared, not teleported. The battle just now had allowed Grimm to come into contact with various types of shadow creatures. Although they were proficient in dark magic, and had mastered some strange shadow abilities, their movements were still so weak that they were almost undetectable. If not for the AI chip's help, Grimm might not have been able to capture this level of shadow leap or shadow traverse. However, when the Dark Shadow Assassin disappeared, Grimm could not detect any traces of the elemental fluctuations even if he opened his eyes wide. It was as if the Dark Shadow Assassin had instantly blended into the background, making it impossible to track it through the traces of the elemental fluctuations. The fire dragon's breath pierced through the shadows left behind by the Dark Shadow Assassin and set the entire dark corridor ablaze. However, the Dark Shadow Assassin was nowhere to be seen, and its aura was nowhere to be seen. Just as Grimm's fire dragon's breath came to an end, a short black figure silently slid out from the void behind him. The two black daggers in their hands pierced towards Grimm's back without the slightest sound or aura. With Grimm's perception as a Grade 4 fire wizard, how could he not sense the strange changes happening behind him? However, although the opponent's movements seemed light and unintentional, in the eyes of an outsider, they were as fast as lightning. Moreover, the two black daggers were dull. Although Grimm could not sense any elemental aura from them, they gave off a ruthless aura, as if they were peerless weapons. Faced with the Dark Shadow Assassin, Grimm's mind raced. He did not choose to use a defensive spell on his flaming coral staff, but instead chose to attack. The two black daggers pierced through the flame barrier, pierced through the lava armor, and stabbed into Grimm's back. They shuttled back and forth between the lava and flesh, moving between the torrents of flames, slicing and churning rapidly, trying their best to deal as much damage to Grimm as possible. Grimm endured the excruciating pain and shot a beam of red light at the dark body of the Shadow Assassin. In the next second, dense fire elemental aura condensed into flame shackles in the void, binding the Dark Shadow Assassin and Grimm together. Flame shackles. It was a type of confinement-type fire spell. It could bind the enemy together, and if the enemy wanted to escape, they would have to bear 3 times the damage of the spell. Seeing that the situation was not good, the Dark Shadow Assassin no longer cared about hurting Grimm, and tried to escape Grimm's side in a flash. Unfortunately, before his pitch-black body could blend into the darkness, he was dragged out by the flame shackles that were linked to his body. After 2 flashes, the Dark Shadow Assassin could not escape. It could only brandish its black daggers and slash at the flame shackles. However, this was enough for Grimm to completely lock onto its soul undulations and elemental aura. Grimm stretched out his left hand and grabbed the neck of the Dark Shadow Assassin, who could not escape. Berserk golden flames flowed along his arm and instantly spread to the Dark Shadow Assassin's body. In the next second, the Dark Shadow Assassin roared and danced around, cutting Grimm's arm into a bloody mess. Flames flew everywhere. However, no matter how serious the damage was, Grimm did not loosen his grip, and the golden flames continued to pour into the Dark Shadow Assassin's body. Finally, after 11 flicks of his fingers, the Dark Shadow Assassin could no longer endure the burning of the law flames, and with a bang, it exploded into a black mist that filled the sky. Within the black mist, a gloomy black gem fell, and Grimm caught it. Shadow Diamond. A Grade 4 Shadow Diamond. This time, he could not ignore it as calmly as before. After all, Grade 4 Shadow Diamonds were not easy to find even in the Magus world. If shadow fragments were a Grade 1 Magus material, then 100 shadow fragments could be fused into a Grade 2 shadow crystal. 100 Grade 2 shadow crystals could be fused into a Grade 3 shadow stone, and 100 Grade 3 shadow stones could be fused into a Grade 4 shadow diamond. Legend had it that the shadow diamond was a top-notch darkness-type Magus material. If the shadow diamond fell into Magus Holly's hands, he might be able to create a shadow puppet that could freely traverse the shadow world. It was a Grade 4 darkness-type metal puppet that could hide behind its master's back and protect him at all times. If the shadow diamond fell into the hands of a summoner, they could summon a Grade 4 shadow dragon. The shadow dragon was pitch black, had sharp claws and shadow wings, and could spit out shadow flames. It was a strange species that was a cross between a dragon and a shadow creature. If the shadow diamond fell into the hands of a high-ranked alchemist, it would not be a problem to create a shadow scepter that could summon the entire Shadow Legion. Of course, the strength of the Shadow Legion was directly related to the alchemist's attainments in alchemy. When it came to the shadow diamond, the AI chip could give Grimm hundreds of suggestions on how to use it and how to maximize its value. However, now was not the time to discuss this. After all, there was still a terrifying dark witch that he had yet to deal with. Grimm kept the shadow diamond in satisfaction and took out a purple healing potion from his robes. He popped the cork off the bottle and swallowed it in one gulp. Only after the huge bloody hole on his back was quickly healed by the combined effects of the magic potion and his super-strong physical strength, did he take a step forward and gently push open the wooden door. Chapter 1101. Behind the wooden door was an endless expanse of darkness. If Grimm did not clearly understand that he was standing in front of an ordinary bedroom in an ordinary wooden building in an ordinary town, he would have suspected that he was in the vast shadow realm. In the boundless darkness, a huge dark shadow was wriggling about with its claws and fangs bared. When Grimm's gaze fell on this huge shadow, a sense of loathing arose from the depths of his heart. Enmity. Undisguised enmity. When Grimm's aura appeared in this strange space, a strong sense of hostility rose from the depths of the huge shadow, and this hostility was etched into the depths of Grimm's heart. If it was a regular Magus, it would be difficult to see through the powerful and distorted shadow space outside the huge shadow. However, Grimm's eyes flickered with blue light, and with just a few flicks of his fingers, he saw everything. With the help of the AI chip's powerful elemental scanning, long-range vision, long-range perception, motion capture, and other strange abilities, Grimm's gaze penetrated the protective force field and saw everything in the huge shadow. The dark witch Shunny was currently standing naked in the shadow. A strange black stone floated in front of her, spewing out a huge amount of shadow energy. A portion of the shadow energy was absorbed by Shunny's body and transformed into profound and mysterious magic patterns that appeared on her body. The other part was absorbed by the dense and strange spell formations in the surroundings, transforming into a powerful shadow force that supported the huge shadow-like domain. Grimm's gaze swept past Shunny's naked body, ignoring the boundless scenery of the undulating mountains and her anxious and angry gaze. Instead, it landed on the magic patterns that were slowly appearing. Shunny's body was white and smooth, with a slim waist and perky breast. She had everything a beautiful woman should have. However, as the huge amount of shadow energy flowed into her body, strange black patterns started to spread from her toes. At first glance, these patterns looked like the decorative patterns of a rose branch. However, when Grimm's gaze landed on them, the AI chip's rapid scanning, extraction, and magnification revealed the details of these patterns. This was not a pattern at all, but a strange rune formed by lines of fine and complicated witchcraft lines. From the large number of runes extracted by the AI chip, it could be deciphered that the Dark Witch was actually risking her own life. Using the endless shadow energy in the strange black stone as a foundation and her own body as a carrier, she wanted to project the entire tower of the Dark Witch clan in the far north of the Magus world. Once her plan succeeded, she would temporarily possess the same offensive and defensive power as the Origin Tower in this shadow-like domain. Grim watched as the magical patterns on Shuni's body slowly extended past her ample breasts and towards her neck. He knew that he couldn't delay any longer. If Shuni were to really summon the power of the Darkness Origin Tower to him, he would definitely be no match for her. Therefore, after seeing everything clearly, Grim did not hesitate to transform. His body was expanding, and his consciousness was roaring. Endless golden flames surged out of the heart of the Rule, combining with the crimson lava that surged out of the void, condensing into a 10-meter-tall golden flame giant. Under the infusion of the golden flames, the few magic tools that Grim used to own were manifested in a form that was half material and half energy. After all, the flame set equipment was a grade 3 magic tool that Grim had custom-made for himself. Although it could not keep up with his pace, it could still be used to a certain extent after manifesting. The only things that could really help Grim were the grade 4 sodden divine ring and the flaming coral staff. As for the rest of the magic tools, under the infusion of the golden flame, they were melted and destroyed one by one due to the fact that they couldn't bear the great power before they could turn into magic tools. After all, Grim was now a grade 4 legendary fire wizard. Those grade 2 and 3 magic tools could only be used for fun, but once he stepped onto the battlefield, they could no longer withstand Grim's violent attacks. You can see me? The Dark Witch, Shuni, seemed to only realize this problem at this moment. She clamped her legs together in embarrassment, covering her chest with one hand and the grass below her navel with the other. 2 huge red clouds appeared on her pretty face, but it was a pity that her hand was too small compared to the area she wanted to cover. Therefore, her half-covered body, coupled with her embarrassed and angry expression, added a bit of charm and allure to her. Grim, who had transformed into a huge golden flame man, laughed maniacally. "Save it! You're an old witch who has been famous for hundreds of years, yet you still want to put on such a pure and innocent appearance. Are you trying to disgust me, or are you trying to stall for time? Don't you want my life very much? Now, let's see who wants whose life." Along with the deafening roar of the flames, Grim waved his flaming coral staff, and a huge pillar of golden flames that was 100 meters thick exploded with the dark core at the center. The violent and ferocious golden flames collided with the dark and deep shadow energy, immediately causing an energy explosion that engulfed the entire dark space. The two energies of different attributes collided, entangled, devoured, and annihilated each other. A molten magic wall rose in front of Grim, barely blocking the surging energy waves. The Dark Witch, Shuni, was obviously unable to escape from the ritual. She could only watch as the golden flames madly eroded the protective barrier formed by the Shadow Pearl. The translucent barrier of darkness vibrated continuously, and even caused some of the energy inside to become chaotic. Shuni, who had been pretending to be innocent a moment ago, suddenly retracted her expression. The shyness and immaturity on her face were swept away, and her eyes emitted a cold and vicious glint. "How is this possible? You're just a newly promoted grade 4. With your strength, how could you so easily shake the Shadow Pearl's barrier?" Shuni screamed crazily, and her expression revealed a trace of madness and viciousness. She could not be blamed for losing her composure, as Grim's attack power was indeed a little too abnormal. As Shuni's estimation was not accurate, she made 2 unforgivable mistakes. First, she thought that the grade 4 shadow assassin that the Shadow Pearl had catalyzed could buy her enough time to complete the ritual. That was why she did not cancel the ritual when she sensed Grim approaching. Second, when the shadow assassin failed, she thought that she could rely on the Shadow Pearl's protective barrier to last until the ritual ended. After all, she was only 3 minutes away from the completion of the ritual. Chapter 1102. This was a hidden crypt in the mountains. It was dark and deep. The air was filled with a chilling and terrifying aura. Suddenly, a deep light lit up in the absolute darkness. It briefly illuminated the underground cave that was about 100 square meters in size. Most of the cavern was empty. Only a small stone pond of about 5 by 4 meters square had been dug out in the center. Viscous and smelly black liquid flowed out of the pond. Amidst the strange sound of water, an abnormally pale woman's face emerged from the black liquid, followed by a pale naked body and messy long hair. As soon as she emerged from the water, the strange woman suddenly opened her eyes, revealing a pair of brown eyes filled with endless hatred and anger. Looking at her face, it was the dark witch, Shunny. Good. Very good. Grim, I'll remember your name. Our hatred is endless. I'll make sure you never have peace. After angrily cursing and venting a few words, Shunny finally managed to stand up from the small stone pool. The body that she had just condensed was weak and humble. Sensing the cold and damp air in the underground cave, she could not help but shiver. Her previous body had already been destroyed by the legendary fire wizard, and this body had just been condensed from the pool of spiritual energy. It had 0 magic resistance, and was almost no different from an ordinary human girl. That was why it could not withstand the chill of the underground wind. However, this was not the focus of her attention. Shunny lowered her head and looked at her empty chest. Her eyes could not help but widen. Where's the shadow pearl? Could it be that after I died, my soul did not bring the shadow pearl back when I escaped? After searching for a few times, she could not find any trace of the shadow pearl. This time, Shunny completely exploded. It did not matter if other equipment and tools were lost, but the shadow pearl was the source of the Dark Witch clan's treasure. If it was lost, Shunny could not help but shiver again. She did not dare to imagine what would happen when she returned to the clan. Grim, I hate you. The hoarse and angry roar reverberated in the dark and deep underground cave for a long time. Huh? Isn't she a tier 4 witch? Why was his resistance so weak? That shadow assassin lasted for more than 10 seconds, but she couldn't even last 5 seconds. Grim clicked his tongue and sighed as he swiftly cleaned up the battlefield. The first thing that entered his hand was naturally the strange shadow pearl that looked like a black pebble. Attacked by the golden flames, the Dark Witch Shunny didn't even have the chance to make a sound after her protective force field was broken. She instantly turned into ashes. Naturally, the shadow pearl was left behind. Even though Grim was already a grade 4 wizard, he could still feel a slight tingling sensation on his palm when he touched this grade 5 shadow orb. Adjua had only been able to withstand the corrosion of the pure shadow energy dispersing from the shadow pearl thanks to his high constitution and magic resistance. If it was a rank 3 magus, the flesh on their arms would have been corroded by the shadow orb and turned into shadow substance. Following Shunny's death and the change of ownership of the shadow pearl, the huge core of darkness quickly began to collapse and disperse. The shadow-like domain that enveloped Maplewood Town also began to dissipate bit by bit. Without the pull of the Darkness Tower, the instinctive repulsion between the Morian plane and the shadow plane would cause them to separate on their own. However, Maplewood Town was an area where the two planes overlapped, so there would more or less be some shadow power left behind. It would take a long time for the chaotic laws of the plane to be completely restored. With the disappearance of the shadow-like domain, the power of the laws of the Morian plane regained control of the land, and the domain power that had been suppressing Wizard Holly and the two-headed wizard dissipated on its own. Wizard Holly and Chio-Lisha slowly stretched out their spirit senses, and as soon as they touched Grimm's, they knew the final result of the battle. Grimm was still here, but the aura of the Dark Witch Shunny had disappeared without a trace. Wasn't the result of the battle clear enough? Congratulations, sir. Wizard Holly was the first to send a message. I knew that sinister woman would not be a match for Lord Grimm. Congratulations. Chio-Lisha naturally had to flatter and flatter Wizard Holly. To be honest, although the two of them spoke in a relaxed manner, their hearts were in turmoil. Who was Shunny? A rank 4 intermediate Dark Witch who had been famous for more than 500 years. Her own strength was already very terrifying, and she had planned this from the start. It was not like the two wizards did not see the arrangements she made last night. If they were to exchange their lives with Grimm, they would probably die here even if they had 10 lives. But now, when they woke up, the Dark Witch had disappeared, and only the legendary Fire Wizard was left. The situation was self-evident. Even the arrogant wizard Holly could not help but lower his head and quietly express his goodwill to Grimm. After all, in the wizard world, a strong individual's strength was the fundamental guarantee of power and benefits. Without power, the so-called power and benefits were nothing more than fleeting clouds. While dealing with the two warm-hearted wizards, Grimm was reviewing some of the precious legacies left behind by the Dark Witch. After a night of battle, Grimm had obtained a Tier 5 Shadow Orb and a Tier 4 Shadow Diamond from the Dark Witch. He also found 2 pieces of equipment and a witchcraft tool from the ashes of the Dark Witch after she died. This meant that he could summon a Rank 3 basic Shadow Killer every 40 seconds. The effect was quite good. However, the power attribute of this earring was not suitable for Grimm. Once the shadow energy was exhausted, he would have to look for a dark wizard to recharge it. But now that Grimm had the Shadow Orb, he did not need to worry about the lack of shadow energy. Grimm put away the first wizard artifact with satisfaction and carefully inspected the second one. Item name: Ring of Shadows. Item type: Magic Ring. Item attribute: Dark. Item level: Rank 4 base strength, +2 agility, +1 spirit, +1 vitality. Special effect: Duration of all dark curses doubled, all shadow damage doubled. Skill: Dark Summoning, able to summon a Rank 4 basic shadow killer. It was also a pretty good Rank 4 dark element magic tool, and it was very compatible with Shuni's attributes. Chapter 1103. The remaining enchanted item was a Tablet of Fate. If it was placed close to one's body, it would heat up as soon as it sensed danger, alerting the user. It could be considered a good warning tool. Since this tool was related to the mysterious power of fate, it was difficult to determine its grade. However, based on the strength of the power of fate, the AI chip classified it as a Grade 3 item. This meant that it had a certain degree of credibility when predicting the presence of a Grade 3 creature or item. As for items that were Grade 3 and above, it only had a vague warning function. Unlike the 2 Grade 4 tools, this Tablet of Fate was not a source item, so Grimm could use it directly. Without hesitation, Grimm placed it in a pocket in front of his chest and pressed it tightly against his chest. After cleaning up the battlefield, the town was bathed in the golden light of dawn. The warm sunlight shone through the wooden windows on both ends of the corridor, dispersing the last trace of darkness in the air. Due to the fierce battle just now, the entire building was almost destroyed. The rooms on Grimm's side were all burnt to the ground by the flames, leaving only the broken walls and a few pieces of burnt furniture that barely showed their original appearance. Grimm pushed open the half-blackened wooden door. Just as he stepped into the charred corridor, the door on the other side of the building opened with a squeak. Wizard Hori walked out of the room while stretching his body. "What a beautiful morning! Congratulations, Lord Grimm." Wizard Holly turned a blind eye to the scene of devastation in front of him and greeted Grimm with a face full of smiles. Grimm naturally returned the greeting politely. The two of them exchanged a few fake pleasantries and walked down the half-collapsed stairs one after another. Chiolisha was also waiting for them in the hall on the first floor. With a tacit understanding, the three of them did not mention the battle last night, nor did they care about the hellish scene around them. They did not even ask about Shuni's whereabouts. Just as the three of them were chatting, a trembling voice suddenly sounded from the side. "Save me! Please save me!" The three of them turned their heads and saw a middle-aged lady dressed in luxurious clothing. Her eyes were bleeding as she stretched out her withered and charred hands. She was shakily walking towards them. Grimm furrowed his brows. With the intensity of the battle between him and Shuni last night, the entire Maplewood town should have been razed to the ground, and it was impossible for the residents here to survive. Moreover, Grimm could clearly see that the middle-aged lady's entire body was somewhat hazy and illusory. Under the golden sunlight, her clothes and flesh seemed to be translucent. This form, this aura, it seemed a little like a specter. Before Grimm could finish his thoughts, the two twin sisters drifted out from the dining hall not far away. Their faces were also covered in blood, and they were also crying for help. Their bodies were exactly the same as their mothers'. Looks like their dead souls were bound to this land and were corroded by the overly dense shadow energy. That's why they turned into such a strange spirit form. Wizard Holly couldn't help but exclaim, "Don't worry about them. They are now considered to be earthbound spirit. As long as they're on this land, they're very hard to kill." Just as Holly finished his words, the middle-aged lady suddenly seemed to be enraged. She fiercely pounced towards him, and a pair of dirty, withered hands slashed across his body, but strangely, they did not touch anything. Facing the provocation of a low-rank spirit, Wizard Holly's face suddenly changed. A hint of hatred appeared on his face. "Damn you, you really don't know how to read a situation. Looks like if I don't teach you a lesson, you won't know what fear is." Wizard Holly cursed with hatred. He lifted his hand and a bright starlight fell on the middle-aged lady's body. The so-called spirit form was not afraid of physical attacks, but it could still be hurt by elemental spells. Under the shine of the starlight, the lady did not even have time to escape. She let out a shrill scream and melted into a puddle of black liquid, then evaporated. However, before Grimm and the others could look away, a white light flashed in the corner of the hall, and the middle-aged lady appeared again. This time, she seemed to know how powerful the wizards were. She shrieked and shrank in the corner, not daring to provoke them again. The two beautiful twin sisters also screamed and ran out. As if they were affected by some kind of fluctuation, countless white figures appeared from all over the half-collapsed building and began to wander around aimlessly. Looking at their figures and appearance, they were the maids, servants, cooks, and guards of this noble's private mansion. They seemed to have not realized that they were already dead. They were all wearing the clothes they had when they were alive, and they were still busy in the building as usual. When the three of them walked out of the building, they realized that the town had already awakened. In the charred and collapsed ruins, strange spirits with hazy bodies were busy as usual. Some were sweating profusely as they worked hard to unload the goods, some were wearing aprons and getting up to cook, some were yawning and stretching as they dismantled the doors of their shops. Even more were wandering on the streets, greeting each other with a smile and saying good morning, as if everything was still so warm. When they saw Grimm and the others, they could not help but hide in the distance, peeping through the corners of the streets and through the gaps in the doors. They seemed to think that the three wizards were strange guests who had accidentally intruded. "Let's go." Grimm glanced at the town one last time. He could not help but shake his head and leave with a sigh. There were too many secrets in the plain. Even with the power and wisdom of wizards, they might not be able to see through all the unknowns. And the battle between him and the Dark Witch Shunny, due to some kind of coincidence, had forcibly turned this human town into a ghost town. If it was any other time, Grimm might have stayed here for a while to study the mysteries of the spirits and the formation of the ghost town. Unfortunately, this was a dangerous plane, and he had a heavy responsibility on his shoulders, so he could only leave. Auspicious View Garden, Floating Space City. Lucia walked alone on the white moonstone path. This was the time when the Arcana apprentices would seize the time to study and try their best to pass the Arcana exam. Usually, there would be groups of Arcana apprentices wandering around the Arcana garden. Some of them would cover their faces with books, lying on the white jade railings, reciting those awkward magic spells. Some of them would circle around the Arcana fountain, repeatedly memorizing those mind-blowing Arcana formulas. Some of them would simply run to the spell pool and finish their Arcana routine for the day, but now, such scenes could no longer be seen. Ever since the dam retreat plan was secretly spread in Floating Space City, the whole Arcana school had been in a mess, giving people a strange feeling of not knowing what day it was. There were fewer and fewer apprentices in the Arcana school. Lucia walked for a long time, but she did not see any apprentices. Even if she did see some, they were just like her, walking in a hurry with books in their arms, looking worried. Hurrying through the hall of secret spells, through the empty winding corridors, Lucia quickly walked into the open-air hall of knowledge. This was the place where arcana apprentices like her would listen to the public classes of the arcanists. The hall of knowledge was open air, but above the hall was a layer of transparent arcana barrier. Every time it rained, while watching the ripples of the raindrops blossoming and sliding on the arcana barrier, listening to the arcanists explaining various arcana formulas and principles in simple terms, the strange feeling of the truth of the world being revealed in front of her was simply wonderful. Today's public class was taught by Sir Brown, a second circle arcanist, himself, about the development of the Arcana Empire. This kind of class was also Lucia's favorite, so even though she knew the current situation was not good, she still came here regardless of anything. There was still a quarter of an hour before the class started, and in the Hall of Knowledge that could accommodate thousands of people, there were only 3 to 5 people sitting sporadically. There were men and women, all very young, and like Lucia, they were all young apprentices who were born with a passion for arcana. When Lucia found a seat in the front row and sat down, it didn't take long for the short, slightly bald arcanist Brown, who was wearing a pair of gold-rimmed tortoiseshell glasses on the bridge of his nose, to come in. Looking at the sparse figures in the hall, Arcanist Brown sighed softly without anyone noticing. Soon he adjusted his mood, stood on the platform of truth, and used his deep and low voice to talk about the development history of the entire Arcana Empire in the past 10,000 years. Such a history, the Arcana apprentices had already browsed and read countless times through books and photographic crystals. But when a real arcanist retold the history again with an irrefutable deep voice, and called up pieces of precious historical images to support it, the inner passion of several arcana apprentices was ignited again. One by one, they listened with flushed faces, their blood was boiling, and they could not wait to die in place of those arcanists who were courageous, only to be able to let their names appear in that glorious and magnificent chapter of history. The 5-hour public lecture soon came to an end. When Arcanist Brown announced the end of the class with a hoarse voice, he lowered his head and slowly and carefully sorted out the arcana props he had brought. Lucia didn't leave, but slowly came near the platform of truth. The Arcana Master's apprentices also silently gathered around. "Mentor, has the Arcana Empire really abandoned us?" The crowd was silent for a moment, and finally a male apprentice asked the question with a flushed face. Brown's hand trembled slightly, he didn't look up, and he didn't speak. "Mentor, thank you for your teaching during this time. My family has urged me to go back. Here is no longer a safe enough place." The male apprentice said incoherently, and in the end, even he himself didn't know what he was saying. Finally, he stopped talking, bowed deeply to Brown, turned around and ran away as fast as he could. And those Arcana apprentices also sighed one after another, bowed and left. "Mentor, I won't go. I still want to continue learning Arcana with you." Lucia bit her lips tightly, she bit so hard that she almost bled. At that moment, Arcanist Brown finally raised his head. There was a mist on his tortoiseshell glasses. "Leave, Lucia. The big tree that is the Arcana Empire is about to fall. What you need to do now is to get away from here as far as possible. In this way, you may be able to leave a seed of Arcana for the Morian plane in the future. Leave, listen to me, leave, Lucia." Chapter 1104. Under the gloomy sky, an arcane sentry tower swiftly flew across a vast plain filled with golden wheat. At the end of the plain, billowing black smoke rose into the sky, and earth-shattering roars of battle could be heard continuously. Looking into the distance, one could see strange monsters that were as large as hills colliding and killing in a frenzy. Fighting them to the death were huge arcane puppets that were hundreds of meters tall and made of azure crystals. While the battle on the ground was earth-shattering, the sky was not idle either. Strange monsters with eagle wings on their backs were fighting a bloody battle against the arcane watchtowers that were circling in the sky. Above them, a strange-looking star beast had already rushed to the especially large floating city. It was roaring furiously amidst the dense arcane cannons and torrents, destroying everything in front of it in a frenzy. This star beast was extremely large, almost the size of a human city. Its huge body was densely covered in pitch-black scales, and its lower body was densely packed with hundreds of thick appendages and giant legs. Although it was bloated and ferocious, it had a nimbleness that was not commensurate with its size. It twisted its body and roared loudly as it crawled forward quickly. The dense cannons fired from the floating fortress and the arcane watchtowers blasted the surface of its body into a continuous sea of fire, leaving behind several meters deep and 10-meter wide pits of flesh and blood. If this kind of injury had been inflicted on an ordinary creature, they would have died a long time ago. However, for this colossus that was thousands of meters in size, it was nothing more than a minor ailment. It couldn't harm its life force at all. However, such a concentrated barrage of arcane techniques still caused the star beasts to suffer greatly. It raised its neck and let out all kinds of strange roars that shook the heaven and earth. It raised its giant claws and swiped around, and rows of tall arcane buildings collapsed in a huge dust pillar. Be it humans or buildings, it was impossible to remain intact under its sharp claws that were dozens of meters long. Even those arcane towers that were protected by powerful arcane powers would squeak and distort in a series of crackling energy explosions when they were swept by the astral beast's 10-meter-thick limbs. If the arcane tower did not evade in time and was attacked by the astral beast's horrifying limbs, even the arcane tower, which was known as a flying fortress, would explode into a huge firework after a series of earth-shattering explosions. If the official Arcana Tower was already in such a state, then the simplified guard towers were even more fragile. Therefore, in the face of this terrifying astral beast that was charging up the floating city, large groups of arcanists rushed out from various arcane towers and floating fortresses, controlling huge and mighty arcane puppets, surrounding the astral beast and madly attacking it. The parasitic beasts on the surface of the star beast's body were driven by the star beast to engage in a frenzied battle with the arcanists and arcane puppet. The powerful astral beast spewed thick energy beams of different colors, sweeping out a large area of death on the surface of the floating city, while twisting its body and trying to crawl to the core of the magnificent palace. Wherever its huge body and densely packed thick limbs passed, houses collapsed and the ground cracked, and the purplish-black blood flowing from the many wounds on its body fell on the ground, and soon it would condense into a violent and ferocious bloodthirsty beast. Their ferocity and strength were not inferior to that of a second-ring Arcana Master, and a level 2 arcane tower, even in the Arcane Kingdom, could be regarded as a relatively noble profession. But for this huge astral beast, any drop of blood in its body combined with the matter in the plane could condense into a terrifying level 2 monster. That also fully demonstrated the power and horror of this astral beast. It was just a level 6 astral beast. If it was outside the plane barrier, the huge arcane kingdom could rely on a large number of great arcanists and the powerful half-plane fortress to blast it into pieces with intensive firepower. But when this level 6 astral beast broke into the plane, although its attack power was limited to the peak of level 4, its huge body and strong physique made it a terrible monster that was almost impossible to destroy. In the face of such a huge astral beast, even the 2 arcane emperors who were as high as level 8 were a little fearful. With their power, it was naturally no problem to kill this astral beast. However, it was precisely because the power they controlled was too great that even a little bit of the residual power that leaked out would cause more damage to the floating city and this plane of existence than to the astral beast, and it would be even harder to deal with. It was also because of this that the great arcanists were so afraid and at their wits' end. These astral beasts could ignore the huge damage caused to the plane world by the wild battle, but they couldn't ignore it. After all, the Morian plane belonged to the Arcane Kingdom, it belonged to the Arcanists and the Great Arcanist. Once their home was destroyed by unscrupulous attacks, how were they going to defend against the powerful enemies that were eyeing them covetously from outside the dimensional barrier, wanting to invade them on a large scale? The Light of Truth Floating City. As the largest and most powerful floating space city in the Arcane Kingdom, the Light of Truth played a pivotal role in the entire Morian plane. In the center of the Light of Truth floating city, there was a magnificent and exquisite Arcana palace. The palace was divided into 10 floors, and each floor was about 100 meters tall. On the broad and flat platform above, Arcana academies of various sizes, public libraries, Arcana institutes, study centers, observatory, Arcana laboratories, as well as a large number of puppet manufacturing rooms, were distributed in a disorderly manner. Among the only 2 arcane emperors of the Arcane Kingdom, the ruler, Garcia, was stationed there all year round. He had also built the Light of Truth floating city into the unique political and economic center of the entire Arcane Kingdom. It was a pity that at the time of the catastrophe, the Light of Truth floating city had become the main target of many powerful enemies from the outer realm. The 2 arcane emperors were still resisting the attacks of the terrible enemies outside the plane barrier. Inside the plane barrier, a grade 6 star-swallowing beast had entered the Morian plane and was attacking the Light of Truth floating city unscrupulously. It seemed that it wanted to attack the control center of the floating city and let the Light of Truth floating city fall from the sky. With the current scale of the Light of Truth floating city, once it fell to the ground, it would be difficult to rise to the sky again within 100 years. Once the Light of Truth fell, the half-plane fortress of the Arcane Kingdom, which was currently outside the plane barrier, would lose the necessary energy supply. At that time, relying on the half-plane fortress and the floating arcane tower to barely block the enemy's war front, there was a risk of instant collapse. Therefore, no matter how great the losses were, the Arcanists had to annihilate the star-swallowing beast and break the invasion plot of the enemies from the outer realm. In the Arcane Palace, 3 grade 6 great Arcanists gathered together and argued fiercely. Activate the Light of Annihilation. We must activate the Light of Annihilation. Otherwise, if the star-swallowing beast really attacks the center, what can we rely on to stop its advance? No. The power of the Light of Annihilation is too great, it will burn the energy core. Once the energy core is destroyed, do we have the resources to repair it? What should we do? Are you going to watch as our people die and our homes are trampled by soft foot? This won't do, that won't do, let me, this old man, rush out and fight with that big guy. I don't believe that the self-destruction of a grade 6 great Arcanist can't kill it. The 3 of them argued fiercely, but none of them could convince the other. This caused the atmosphere in the hall to become unusually depressing and anxious. Chapter 1105. As the huge and ferocious energy beam of the floating city's energy core linked to the humanoid shadow, the energy aura rising from his body became deeper and more restrained. Energy Spear, Arcane Phantom, Philiast, Light of Truth. With the fierce shout of the humanoid shadow, a strange white light 3 meters thick shot out from his hand and landed on the head of the behemoth-like star-swallowing beast. It was strange to say that other energy beams and arcane halos would be distorted, refracted, and dissipate most of their power when they touched the protective force field outside the star-swallowing beast. But this strange white light didn't seem to belong to any elemental spectrum. It ignored the protective force field outside the star-swallowing beast's body and the tough and strange scales of the star-swallowing beast. It went straight through the star-swallowing beast's head without any hindrance. A moment ago, the star-swallowing beast was still advancing with an unstoppable momentum, but in the next moment, it was like a volcano that had suddenly erupted. A huge bloody hole was drilled into its huge head, and a thick, stinky blood pillar that was tens of meters tall sprayed out from it. The star-swallowing beast, which was seriously injured, raised its head and let out a deafening roar. A pair of huge green eyes with a diameter of more than 10 meters quickly focused on the strange humanoid shadow standing thousands of meters away above the arcane palace. One of the twin emperors of the arcane kingdom. The terrifying ruler, Garcia. No, it wasn't him, it was just one of his energy clones. Although the star-swallowing beast recognized the identity of the other party in an instant, in the face of a Grade 8 Arcane Emperor's energy clone, even if it was the most terrifying star beast in the world, it had to retreat. After all, there was a huge gap in strength between the two sides. No matter how many ordinary Grand Arcanists came, the star-swallowing beast wouldn't be afraid. Because, under the shackles of the plane's laws, the upper limit of the arcane attack they could activate was only at the peak of Grade 4. An attack of this level might kill most creatures, but it was difficult to cause a fatal blow to a void creature like the star-swallowing beast. It was precisely because it understood this that the star-swallowing beast dared to charge into the Morian plane and attack the floating city so boldly. But unfortunately, it wasn't lucky. Kasia, the ruler of the Emperor of Arcana, who was locked in a fierce battle in the outer realm, had actually split a part of his power to project back into the plane at this critical moment, forming an energy clone. This had clearly exceeded the star-devouring beast's expectations. Others might not be able to kill the star-swallowing beast, but an Emperor of Arcana like Garcia could definitely do it. Chapter 1106. A rank 6 star-devourer beast had died in battle. The army of mutated beasts sent by the Disaster Lord had been defeated. The clone of Emperor Agassi had appeared in the Light of Truth floating city. Grimm could not help but frown at the series of reports. Ordinary rank 4 wizards were not willing to participate in this kind of otherworld battlefield. One of the main reasons was that it was too difficult to control the level of the battle. Originally, with Grimm's party's strength, there weren't many Tier 4 magi who could kill them in the inner plane. However, as the major factions continued to extend their hands into the Morian plane, the intensity and level of the planar war had skyrocketed. Grimm and his team were rank 4 wizards, and they could already be regarded as the top fighting force in the plane. However, if they ran into those guys who pretended to be weak while they were on the rampage, they wouldn't be any better off than the Arcanists who were constantly losing ground. Therefore, ever since they broke into the Morian plane, Grimm and his team had been keeping a low profile. If it were not for the damned attack mission from the A-Team, Grimm and his team would not even want to participate in a pointless battle. Especially now that they heard that even a level 6 star-swallowing beast had fallen in the Morian plane, their hearts would only be more anxious and fearful. The origin of these mutated beasts. Grimm muttered to himself before asking in a low voice. They belong to a powerful calamity creature called the Extreme Night Overlord. They are the peripheral eyes and ears sent by the Extreme Night Overlord. We may have poked a hornet's nest by acting rashly this time. Chiolicia no longer had a smile on her face. What level is that Extreme Night Lord? Wizard Holly asked anxiously. Rank 6. It's also a rank 6. Chiolicia secretly spat and sighed at their bad luck. However, you don't have to worry too much. The main body of that Extreme Night Lord is still fighting the Arcane Kingdom outside the plane barrier. The one that entered the plane is only a rank 4 clone that it has corrupted. It's not a fatal threat to us yet. Hearing this, Wizard Holly breathed a sigh of relief. The calamity creatures were synonymous with chaos and violence. Their souls had already been contaminated and strengthened by the will of the calamity plane. They had become cannon fodder for the calamity lords in their wars and invasions. Therefore, there was no possibility of communication or cooperation with these fellows. Do you know why they are here? Grimm frowned and thought hard. They had gathered a large force and wanted to capture the Light of Truth floating space city, but they were scattered by the Arcane Kingdom. As a result, the low-level disaster lords split up and searched for targets they were interested in. Although I'm unable to extract a complete attack route from the brains of those mutated beasts, I'm afraid that their route coincides with our target, Chiolicia said with a face full of anxiety. Auspicious View Gardens floating city? Grim pondered for a moment. Of course, that was the only place that could attract the disaster creatures. Didn't they risk their lives to cross the dimensional barrier just to slaughter and harvest life energy and souls? Where else could the quality of life energy and souls compare to the floating city that gathered a large number of arcane apprentices and arcanists? After breaking free from the sudden panic of hearing about the Calamity Lord, Wizard Hori's mind immediately became lively again. Do you think, if the three of us work together, can we kill that rank 4 disaster lord? I heard that astral beasts and disaster creatures are the best at absorbing the origin of the plane. They've been inside the plane for so long, maybe they've already plundered some source substance. At the mention of source substance, Grim and Chiolicia's eyes could not help but shine. To be honest, origin substance was extremely important to all Tier 4 sorcerers. If they had source substance, Grim's analysis of the law of fire would definitely be faster. For Chiolicia, source substance could also improve the degree of soul fusion between her and her brother, allowing them to get rid of the awkward situation of not being able to control their bodies at the same time. These lesser disaster lords are surrounded by a shocking number of mutated beasts. If we want to fight it, I'm afraid. Chiolicia was undoubtedly the weakest among the three, so she hesitated and looked at Grim. I think we can give it a try. Grim thought for a moment. When a disaster lord reaches the rank of a lesser disaster lord, their internal strife is even more intense than their enemies in the outside world. That's why rank 4 lesser disaster lords always act alone. This way, we have the advantage in terms of the number of rank 4 wizards. Hearing this, Chiolicia's eyes could not help but light up. Moreover, it's the same target as us, so there will definitely be a conflict between them. Rather than being forced to fight, why not take the initiative and find that rank 4 extreme knight clone, kill it, and reap some benefits? Alright. I think this is a good idea. Wizard Holly chuckled. After all, we've signed an oath, so we can work together against enemies. With the combined strength of 3 rank 4 wizards, can we still not deal with that beast? After saying this, Wizard Holly looked at Chiolicia, who hurriedly nodded. I'll listen to you guys. Even if it's 3 against 1, I think we have a higher chance of winning. Wizard Holly nodded in satisfaction. After nightfall, the 3 of them went their separate ways. Walking along the lush-paved path in the village, Grim found a relatively clean and tidy wooden house. He then crossed the wooden fence that had been trampled on and came to the door. He gently pushed open the half-broken door. Creak. The wooden door opened, revealing the messy furnishings inside. The people who originally lived here did not seem to be rich, and the furniture in the house was simple and old. Coupled with the invasion of the mutated beast, it was a complete mess. All the household furnishings were smashed and scattered on the ground. Grim shook his head slightly. Due to his long human habits, he still preferred to be clean and tidy, and the scene in front of him obviously did not make him happy. He stretched out a finger, and a faint red light condensed on his fingertip. Under the effect of the strange witchcraft, the scattered furniture on the ground slowly floated up from the ground and returned to their original positions, as if they were being moved by invisible hands. Grim snorted. His fingers flickered with a red glow as they moved quickly in the air, condensing into a dazzling golden rune. As the rune fluttered, it turned into a strange greenish-white whirlwind that blew in all directions of the wooden house. All the dust, filth, and debris disappeared in an instant. The entire wooden house was like a magical house from a fairy tale, instantly becoming resplendent and spotless. Grim went around all the rooms in the house, and after deciding on a bedroom and a laboratory, he began to make some simple arrangements. He released 5 rank 1 wind elementals to hover above the village and act as scouts. He also released 2 rank 2 rock puppets to guard the front of the wooden house. Grimm then settled down in the room and began his daily meditation. As a spellcaster, meditation was the most important way for them to continuously train their spiritual force and raise the limit of their spiritual force. However, compared to when they were at a lower rank, the speed of their meditation was like that of a tortoise. Often, they would have to meditate arduously for many years in exchange for a slight improvement in their spiritual force. This was why many magi would think of ways to increase the effect of their meditation by using external objects. Otherwise, the unmoving threshold of their spiritual force would be enough to drive any determined magus crazy. Night quickly descended. 5 rank 1 wind elementals floated about 100 meters in the air, scanning their surroundings while monitoring everything that was happening in the small village below them. Although their presence was concealed, it was impossible for them to escape the senses of the other 2 magi. Sensing the faint aura of Grimm emanating from them, in addition to the fact that they were far away from the place they had chosen, Hori and Chio-Lisha didn't pay any attention to them. Although the 3 of them were in the same team and were bound by a contract, no magus would entrust their safety to another magus. Therefore, after Wizard Holly chose the largest wooden house in the village, he took out a strange Rubik's Cube from his storage space and threw it on the ground. Immediately, more than 10 exquisite puppets with the appearance of humans crawled out from within. There were males and females, and they wore the clothes of singers, maids, servants, and chefs respectively. As soon as they came out, they began to work diligently. The servants cleaned the room and moved out a set of clean tables and chairs from the Rubik's Cube, replacing the old wooden tables and chairs. The maids pushed out a delicately designed dining cart, and soon, brand new cutlery and utensils were placed in front of Wizard Holly. Other than releasing these service-type magic puppets, Wizard Holly also took out a piece of silver and threw it on the ground. Then, with a strange kacha-kacha sound, the silver piece of silver transformed into a metal golem with a silver glow flowing all over its body. This metal golem was only 3 meters tall. It held a shield in its left hand and a heavy sword in its right. Its body was sculpted into the shape of an iron knight. Below the face armor made entirely of metal, a pair of scarlet lights flickered spiritedly. It was not as stiff and sluggish as the other golems. The aura it emitted was at the peak of rank 3. It was even stronger than the elemental magic puppet that Grimm had personally made. Chapter 1107. Compared to Wizard Holly's extravagance, Chio-Lisha's life was much more simple and low-key. There were no powerful puppets to keep watch at night, and there were no free personal servants to serve her. Chio-Lisha had to do it herself, and it took her a full hour to tidy up a hut that she could stay in. After taking care of everything, she stood in the middle of the hut, took out a green ball the size of a goose egg, and threw it on the floor. The ball immediately turned into a pool of green liquid and melted into the ground. With a flick of her finger, a thin, almost imperceptible green barrier enveloped the entire hut, isolating everything around it. On the barrier, there were all kinds of strange hallucinogenic runes that were faintly discernible, constantly spreading psychic illusions and misleading any possible peeping eyes. The 5 wind spirits floated above the village and looked down. The area around Wizard Holly's residence was completely white. Nothing could be seen. Wizard Chio-Lisha's hut was unobstructed, and they could see all her activities through the gaps in the wooden boards. But it was precisely because he could see it so clearly that Grimm could not help but wonder if everything he saw was an illusion. After all, Chio-Lisha was very good at psychic abilities. The night was getting darker, and the sky was densely covered with beautiful twinkling stars. However, in the pitch-black curtain of night, a strange dark red color enveloped the entire sky, causing the moonlight that shone down from the bright and clear moon to carry a trace of blood color that made one's mind restless. Blood moon. This was an ominous sign in any plane, and it was also an instinctive expression of the plane's consciousness. It also often indicated that on this quiet and peaceful night, there might be terrible bloodshed somewhere in the plane. And the bloodshed that could trigger a reaction from the plane's consciousness was terrifying. Grim looked at the blood moon for a while, then gently closed the wooden window and sat back in front of the wooden table. He was not good at divination. If Alice was by his side at this moment, she would be able to describe in detail everything that happened somewhere far away based on the obvious signs of the plane. Unfortunately, in Grimm's place, apart from sensing the disturbing murderous aura, there was nothing else. Maybe there was another plane invasion in the Morian plane, or it would not have caused such a large-scale killing. Who was invading the arcane kingdom? The world of gods, or the calamity? Or was it an abyssal demon? There were too many possibilities, too many guesses, and it made Grimm very upset. The threat of the Great Witch Mesa, the unpredictable future, the harsh and complicated living environment, the uncontrollable direction of development, all of these were weighing on Grimm's shoulders, making him feel more and more depressed. If it had been any other magus, under such pressure, they would have either become a pervert with a twisted mind or a hedonist who went crazy with eating and drinking. As for him, he could only keep his mind clear under such heavy pressure. He ran with all his might at a speed that ordinary people couldn't comprehend, using all the methods and resources he had to strengthen himself. After all, in the magus world, strength was everything. Only when he had absolute power could he be truly safe. He could stop and enjoy the pleasures of life. Therefore, after doing so much, Grimm only wanted one thing, and that was to survive back when he was still a wizard apprentice. His enemies only coveted his body and soul. But now, as he progressed and grew step by step, the enemies of the past had all vanished into thin air, but new enemies kept popping up. Today, he had achieved amazing achievements that outsiders couldn't imagine, but he had also set up some terrible enemies that ordinary people couldn't afford to provoke. Everything that the other side demanded was something that he couldn't afford to pay. Therefore, once he fell into the enemy's trap and was unable to break free, his fate would probably be no better than that of an apprentice. And this was also a sorrowful thing to be a wizard. Most of the time, it wasn't they who chose their life, but life was forcing and urging them to choose. Once they slowed down a little, some terrible things might happen that they didn't want to see. Therefore, when fate gave them something strange, it also made their lives turn into another rugged road where they would die if they didn't move forward. The big hand of fate was fiddling and whipping them from behind. Once they were a little slow, it would be the end of their legendary life. In addition to trying hard to adapt and endure such a life, Grimm had to find ways to surpass it. Only when he was strong enough to exceed the scope of the hand of fate could he really control his life. The night was dark. A scarlet blood moon hung high in the sky. The moonlight that shone on the land was soaked with an unbearable stench of blood. On a towering cliff, Satan stood majestically. He stood there majestically, looking at the world in front of him with the arrogance of a king looking down on the world. It was intoxicated and satisfied as it sniffed the scent of blood floating in the air, sensing the thick murderous aura that was almost impossible to disperse. Through the law plane, he could even hear the mournful screams of his prey before they died, or see the painful and twisted souls that flashed past. Life was also a kind of resource, and the souls of every creature in the plane were a part of history that couldn't be easily erased. But now they had all become his. Satan's? Evil Hoove's personal wealth. As the great lord of extreme night, if he brought such a huge amount of wealth back to the disaster plane, he would probably receive the favor of the world and raise his personal rank, which had been stagnant for 1,000 years, by a small step. Tens of thousands of mutated beasts were scattered across the Kentos continent, attacking cities and invading homes, harvesting countless life energy and souls for him. But it was a pity that there were too few high-quality souls. Thus, in Satan's? Under Evil Hoove's control and command, the scattered mutated beasts began to gather and aim in one direction, the great Arcanist city that floated high in the middle of the continent, Auspicious View Garden. That was his hunting target long ago, and he didn't even hesitate to fight a few lesser disaster overlords that chased after him. After getting a taste of the Lord of Extreme Night's violent and ferocious attacks, the weak mutated beasts could only swallow their anger and change directions, running to attack the other two floating cities. Thus, this beautiful and exquisite floating city became it. Satan's Tartarus? The target that evil hooves wanted to attack and kill the most. Under the night sky, the mutated beast army was still crazily slaughtering and plundering. The life and soul aura that floated over through the law plane entered Satan's body, making him feel increasingly comfortable and satisfied. That was until his enjoyment was interrupted by some despicable intruders. Satan's evil hooves straightened his body, facing the night wind and sniffing with all his might. From the air, he detected a trace of an aura that didn't belong to a disaster creature. There was a trace of order and strictness in the chaotic evil, and a trace of treachery and cunning in the old-fashioned damn it. This is the aura of a magus. Some magi had actually intruded into his hunting area and slaughtered some of his people. Satan's? An evil and cruel aura rose from Evil Hooves' powerful and malevolent body. All of a sudden, he exerted force on his 4 hooves and leaped from the top of the cliff, running wildly and unrestrainedly towards a certain place in the west. The chilly night wind whistled around him. Satan's ran wildly under the moonlight like a galloping horse, his speed far exceeding that of most flying creatures. Paddy fields, forests, and streams flashed past its feet along the way. He passed by many human villages and small towns. Cries and wails could be heard, and flames soared into the sky. Everywhere, he could see and hear the figures of mutated beasts slaughtering in a frenzy. However, Satan's didn't care at all. With a single leap, he could cover a distance of 100 meters. Just like that, he left the human settlements behind as he stubbornly and resolutely charged towards a certain place in the west. As for the mutated beasts that were scattered on the road, upon sensing Evil Hooves' aura, they sped up to complete their harvest. They rushed out of the human villages and followed closely behind Satan's as he charged towards an unknown region in the distance. Under the night sky, a small mutated beast's attack route was mysteriously born. With a single leap, Evil Hooves pounced onto a small hill and suddenly stopped. With a cold and cruel gaze, he swept his gaze across the pitch-black human village not far away. He could faintly sense the auras of 3 souls of varying strengths. In the surroundings of the village, he could also sense the scent of some elemental life forms. If the other party was too weak, Evil Hooves wouldn't have come all the way here to issue a warning. In his perception, the auras of the Magi hidden in the village had reached a level that even he had to pay attention to and be vigilant of. Hence, before the final hunt, he had to first eliminate the unstable factors in the surroundings. These weak Magi were undoubtedly a bunch of annoying little bugs. Not only were they annoying, they were also repulsive. Although their auras had reached the limit of what this plane could contain, Evil Hooves had always looked down on Magi, so he didn't treat them as his true opponents. After all, Magi were mostly born from intelligent races with low innate potential. They were either physically weak or had weak spiritual force, and they had all sorts of flaws that made people turn their noses up at them. With such a race and such a foundation, even if they were to forcefully raise their soul strength to rank 4, in the eyes of the great Satans, in Evil Hooves' eyes, they were still in the category of prey. However, today, Evil Hooves had already found another easier prey. Hence, he had lost interest in hunting and killing these thorny prey. However, Evil Hooves didn't want his momentary mercy to cause these Magi to think ill of him and disrupt his feast of flesh and blood. Hence, some necessary warnings and suppression were necessary. Chapter 1108. As expected, Siahoof's arrival alerted Grimm and the others. They were all grade 4 existences, after all. Although there was still a difference in strength between them, they had all put in a lot of effort into personal protection. Hence, when Hoof appeared on a hill in the distance, Grim, Hiri, and Lisha all sensed it and woke up from their sleep or meditation. Their consciousness became active again. Grim had appeared in the sky above the wooden hut, looking at the ferocious beast crouching on the high ground in the distance. He was nervous and excited at the same time. Even in a large plain like the Sorcerer World, the Calamity creatures were extremely terrifying opponents. This was especially true for the disaster lords that had lived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. They were all powerful existences that were comparable to natural disasters in other planes. Countless planes that lacked the protection of powerful forces had been destroyed by them in one fell swoop, slaughtering all the living beings inside, and looting all the precious resources. Even the origin of the plane that maintained the stability and development of the world had been extracted, causing the entire plane to collapse and become waste floating in the endless sea of stars. If sorcerers were like blood-sucking leeches attached to a plane, then disaster creatures were like army ants that devoured and gnawed on everything. Wherever they passed, the plane would collapse and all living beings would be wiped out. Only a few broken continents would slip into the void storms and become the hosts of the astral travelers. Both sides were at the top of the food chain, but there was a huge gap between their status and power. In terms of power, sorcerers were jackals and wolves, while disaster lords were tigers and leopards that dominated the forest. This was why Hoof dared to charge in front of the sorcerers without any fear. In Grim's eyes, which had a variety of visual effects, this evil Hoofed was no different from an ordinary creature of the plane. There was something different about its body. In terms of size, Hoof's body wasn't huge. He was only 3 meters tall. It was a little too petite, among the hundreds of disaster lords that could easily reach thousands of meters. However, considering that it was only a mutated clone of the level 6 disaster lord, it was reasonable for it to choose a more flexible body to invade the plane. Hoo's body resembled a mastiff, with smooth body lines, strong and powerful limbs, and sharp claws. However, the most attractive part of Hoof was its head. Strictly speaking, Hoof did not have a head. From the neck up, the entire head split open like 4 blooming petals, and the edges were covered with sharp teeth. A thick and long tentacle reached out from the center of the flower. At the end of the tentacle there was a strange eyeball that was looking around. Meteor rain, on the other hand, was a dense meteor shower that fell from the sky. Wherever it hit, it would explode into a huge fireball and shoot terrifying lava fragments in all directions. Flaming Storm, on the other hand, was a ring-shaped flame shockwave that spread in all directions. Every life form that was hit by the flame wave would suffer 700 degrees of fire damage. There were 5 layers of flame waves, and the fire damage could be stacked. If such a compound attack was used against a rank 4 creature, it might not be powerful enough. However, if it was used against a large number of low-level creatures, it would be like opening up a huge incinerator on the battlefield. Whoever dared to charge in would immediately be incinerated into ashes by the 3 fire spells. They would not even have the chance to make a sound. Grim did not use all of his trump cards in his first battle against a Lord-tier creature. Of the 4 fire effects, he only used Increase Fire Range and Empower Fire. He did not reveal the other 2. As for the Focus Crystal that was used as his trump card, he hid it well. He would not take it out unless it was a critical moment. Even so, as a rank 4 legendary fire wizard, Grim's devastating power still made the attacks of the other 2 wizards look like soft water, soft and powerless. As soon as Grim made his move, he instantly annihilated more than 300 mutated beasts that were charging at the forefront. Wizard Holly, under the illumination of the bright starlight, quickly put on his ectoplasm armor and charged into the group of mutated beasts like a hot knife through butter. The ectoplasm armor on Wizard Holly's body seemed a little strange. His punches and kicks had a terrifying power that far exceeded the normal metal puppet. A punch landed on a mutated beast that pounced on him. The strange starlight jumped on the bodies of several mutated beasts around him, instantly blowing them up into a ball of blood. Moreover, the strange starlight continued to shine down. Anyone that got close to Wizard Holly would be hit by the starlight and be paralyzed, unable to control their body. As long as they stopped for even a moment, they would be blown up by Wizard Holly's ferocious steel fists. No matter if it was a rank 1 or 2 little guy or a rank 3 ferocious mutated beast, there was only one result in front of Wizard Holly. They would explode into a bloody mess. For a moment, Wizard Holly controlled his magical armor that was overflowing with strange starlight and rushed left and right in the group of enemies. He was invincible. However, no matter how fast his punches and kicks were, it was not as fast as Grimm's flames, directly killing a group of them. As for Chiolisha, she still did not release Mangles, nor did she transform into a two-headed wizard. Relying on her powerful and strange mental witchcraft, she bewitched and tricked some mutated beasts, causing them to kill each other. These mutated beasts may be invincible monsters in front of the plane's natives, but in front of these rank 4 wizards who stood at the peak of the plane, they were still as weak as a flock of pitiful sheep. With a super meat shield like Wizard Holly at the front, Grimm did not need to worry about defense anymore. He turned his attention to his role as a cannon. He transformed into a 10-meter-tall flame giant, standing in the center of the village. From time to time, he would throw a fire spell to the front line, blocking the path of the mutated beast. He let them run left and right like a bunch of blind people, unable to find a way out. Then, they fell to the ground, howling in pain, and were burned into dried corpses. Although Grimm kept attacking, most of his attention was still focused on Evil Hoof, who was standing on the top of the hill. Even when the battle was at its most intense, Grimm still had 1 or 2 powerful fire spells in his hands that he had not used. If Evil Hoof made any strange moves, he would not hesitate to throw them on its body. Satan's? Evil Hoof was still standing on the top of the hill, silently observing the battlefield. Although his subordinates were being trampled by his opponent and slaughtered by the hundreds, he did not feel the slightest bit of pain or regret in the depths of his heart. No matter how many of them died, it wouldn't even bat an eyelid. As long as he could take down the floating city of the Arcane Kingdom, he could have as many mutated beasts as he wanted. Chapter 1109. To be honest, if these 3 magi were as powerful as the Fire Magus, Sia Hoof would have left without a second word. He would rather lose his entire army of mutated beasts than let this clone of his face the danger of dying. Similarly, if these 3 magi were as powerful as the Fire Magus, Sia Hoof would have taken the lead and charged forward without a second thought. He would not let such a high-quality prey slip by. It was a pity that the other party's team was too strange. Some were strong, some were weak. This made him feel a little depressed. The strong ones were troublesome to deal with, while the weak ones drooled. The petal-like mouth of the Evil Hoof Lotus widened, its hooves slightly squatting, and its entire body instantly disappeared. Invisibility, teleportation, or some other strange ability. Grimm and the others were shocked. No matter how many mutated beasts there were, they could only force them back at most. It was impossible for them to surround and kill them. Hence, the only thing that could threaten the lives of these 3 Tier 4 magi was the strange-looking Lesser Lord of Disaster, Sia Hoof. Hence, the moment Sia Hoof disappeared, Grimm and the others on the battlefield could not help but raise their vigilance, wary of the enemy's sneak attack. Grimm scanned the surroundings, and with his multi-sensory eyes, he immediately caught sight of a blurry silhouette moving rapidly underground. It's underground! Chiolisha, dodge! Grimm shouted, throwing a meteor that he had prepared for a long time at Chiolisha's feet. Chiolisha was the weakest of the 3, so she had long since prepared herself for this. As soon as she heard Grimm's shout, she quickly flew into the air, and moved the bright yellow shield in front of her to her feet. At the same time, the blazing meteor that Grim hurled out smashed towards the calm ground like a thunderbolt. Just as Chiu Lisha's feet left the ground, the originally hard and flat soil suddenly boiled like a swamp. The four-petaled lotus flower-shaped mouth protruded and closed, the sharp teeth on it collided with each other, creating dazzling sparks. By a hair's breadth, Chiu Lisha dodged the enemy's surprise underground attack. Only half of the creature's body had emerged from the water. The only eye on the stalk first glared at Chiu Lisha, then turned to Grim. A hint of ruthlessness flashed across its eyes. At this moment, the falling meteor was not far from the evil hoof. Before the violent and ferocious meteorite even got close, its terrifying temperature had already enveloped the surrounding void. Wisps of white smoke rose from the ground, and the soil near the landing point began to melt rapidly, showing signs of turning into lava. Xie Hoof grinned hideously and sank back into the soil. With a flash of earthen yellow light, the soil became even harder and thicker than rock. Boom! With an earth-shattering explosion, the meteorite smashed into the ground, creating a shallow pit that was more than half a meter deep. The bottom of the pit was filled with dense cracks like a spider web. Meanwhile, the extremely high-temperature flame flow and flame shock waves spread out in all directions in a ring shape, throwing all matter out at a terrifying speed. Chiu Lisha, who had just flown up, was obviously not far enough away. She was immediately enveloped by the flames. The numerous witchcraft protective spells outside her body exploded into fine fireworks amidst a burst of crackling sounds, and the terrifying stream of flames instantly burned her legs into a patch of charred black. Chiu Lisha screamed and escaped. She flew high up in the sky, not daring to land again. Once she stabilized her body in the sky, she frantically took out some bottles from her clothes and poured them into her mouth with all her might. The injuries on her lower body were also recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. Grim had transformed into a flame giant, so he naturally had a much wider field of vision than the average person. Deep in his black eyes, a blue light flashed as he constantly looked around, searching for the whereabouts of Xie Hoof. The violent attack just now had been completely neutralized by Xie Hoof. The meteorite, with a power of up to 1,600 degrees, was blocked by a simple earth elemental halo, causing Chiu Lisha more damage than Xie Hoof. And now, the evil hoof was nowhere to be seen. This time, even Grim couldn't help but feel nervous. As expected, with a wave of earthen yellow ripples, the soil under Grim's feet suddenly turned into loose quicksand, causing his flaming legs to sink into the ground. Not far away, Xie Hoof quickly drilled out of the soil. He opened his lotus petal-shaped mouth and spat out a thick cloud of earth mist at Grim. His opponent was actually proficient in earth elemental magic. This was obviously out of Grim's expectations. The quicksand trap and the gravity halo acted on his body at the same time, causing his tall flaming body to sink bit by bit. The cloud of earth mist that Xie Hoof spat out contained terrifying earth elemental energy, and its target was Grim's heart. Evidently, Xie Hoof had also sensed the terrifying power of the heart of the law in Grim's chest. His body had already been shackled, and he could not escape. Grim could only raise his hands high and condense two 1-meter-thick lava shields in front of him, stacking them together to block the earth mist. Puff. The khaki-colored mist struck the shield formed by the lava and quickly suppressed the scarlet flames. The surface of the lava shield quickly solidified, and then fell off into green-gray powder. The two lava shields, which could withstand 1 to 2,000 degrees of elemental damage when stacked together, didn't even last 3 seconds against the earthen mist before shattering into dust. The moment the lava shield shattered, an even purer ray of earthen yellow penetrated the explosion and struck Grim's left arm. A strange petrifying force quickly infected the arm, causing Grim to almost lose control of it. Beep! Attacked by the petrifying ray, 2100 degrees of energy, chaotic body activated, absorbing a portion of the earth elemental damage, 270 degrees of energy, burning domain activated, negating a portion of the earth elemental damage, 240 degrees of energy, flaming body activated, negating a portion of the earth elemental damage, 650 degrees of energy, magic resistance activated, negating a portion of the earth elemental damage, 410 degrees of energy. A series of prompts from the AI chip filled Grimm's vision. Under the effects of his strange physique and multiple spells, the petrifying force that had invaded Grimm's body was cut down left and right, and its might was greatly reduced. However, the powerful attack of a Grade 4 Lesser Disaster Lord was not so easy to deal with. Even after being weakened several times, Grimm's body still suffered 500 degrees of elemental damage. This 500 degrees of petrifying force was not hidden at all, and after deducting all the true damage that was left behind. Against them, Grimm could only rely on his powerful vitality of 31 points to endure. When the petrification ray hit the arm, the earthen yellow petrification energy and the scorching red flame energy intertwined. The flame arm near the hit area was dyed yellow and red. The colors were mottled, and they were still clashing fiercely. Grimm, who had transformed into a tall man, roared in pain and spat out a near-transparent golden flame from his mouth. His entire body was engulfed in raging flames, and streaks of crimson flame halos attacked in all directions like a violent storm. The evil hoof snickered, and with a stomp of its two front legs, it pulled up a thick wall of earth in front of it. When the raging waves of flames washed over and over again and the earth wall collapsed, the evil hoof that had been hiding behind the wall was nowhere to be found. When it reappeared, it was already 30 meters behind Grimm. Its ferocious mouthparts trembled, and the ground under its feet shook violently as if it was experiencing a magnitude 10 earthquake. Thick earth spears rose from the ground like a forest of stone spears, madly stabbing towards Grimm from all angles. Seeing that this attack was even more frightening than the previous one, Grimm did not dare to be careless. He struck his chest with his hand, and a ring of flames that was far more powerful than before suddenly erupted. In an instant, the stone spear that was thrusting towards him was shattered into dust. When two violent blazing fireballs landed where the evil hoof was just a moment ago, the evil hoof had already disappeared without a trace. After a few consecutive attacks to no avail, and he was almost injured by the evil hoof, Grimm's rage and resentment rose to the extreme. He lifted his foot and stomped fiercely. The soil beneath him immediately cracked and shattered. Streams of red and tumbling magma gushed out from within and instantly condensed into a huge lava pool around him. At the same time, his raging body of flames once again surged with heat waves. The temperature quickly rose from 2,000 degrees to 7,000 degrees, and an egg-shaped light screen of flames covering an area of 300 meters completely enveloped him. It was filled with terrifyingly high-temperature flames and golden flames that were everywhere. After completing his final defense, Grimm's eyes began to burn with passion. He turned into two small suns, frantically scanning the ground around him. As far as his eyes could see, lines of fire left clear burn marks on the ground. Wherever his eyes stopped, the soil would melt, the rocks would soften, and a small pool of lava would be created in an instant. Wizard Holly, who was still fighting the evil hoof, secretly saw this scene, and his face could not help but twitch crazily. Monster! Monster! They're all F***king monsters. After advancing to rank 4, Wizard Hiri relied on his strange sense of starlight and his powerful astral construct. Although he wasn't invincible among rank 4 wizards, he was still a well-known figure among the rank 4 beginner wizards. But today, after coming to this foreign plane battlefield, he finally knew what a real rank 4 powerhouse looked like. Damn it, these two guys had just started fighting, and they had already raised the intensity of the battlefield to such a degree. Now, those two guys could easily be hit by more than 2,000 points of elemental attack. Even with Wizard Holly's strong starlight armor and magic resistance, if he got hit by it, he would at least be skinned alive. Chapter 11:10. If Wizard Hiri was only afraid, Chiolicia was on the brink of despair. Although she and Mangles had advanced to rank 4 by combining their strength, there was still a huge flaw. So far, other than when they transformed, they were considered to be grade 4 wizard. For the rest of the time, they were only in a transitional state between grade 3 and grade 4. If they encountered a rank 3 wizard, they could rely on their two-headed transformation to suppress their opponent. However, if they encountered a real rank 4 wizard, they would be as weak as a pile of rotten meat after the short transformation period. Moreover, their biggest problem now was that their defense was not strong enough. Whether it was physique or magic resistance, they were far weaker than normal rank 4 wizard. Plus, they did not have any powerful defensive spells, which made their bodies especially weak. Not to mention fighting a tier 4 creature, just the shockwave from Grimm's long-range rescue was enough to break through their physical defenses and cause accidental injuries. That alone was enough to prove their strength. With Chiolicia and Mangles' combined defense, they could barely resist the elemental damage below 1,200 degrees. If it was beyond that, they could only take it head-on. However, Grimm's physique was as high as 31 points, so he could withstand the next attack and only suffered a small injury. Chiolicia and the others only had 26 points of physique. With this kind of physique and magic resistance, if they were hit by Evil Hoof, they would probably suffer serious injuries. Therefore, after seeing the battle escalate, even if she was unwilling, Chiolicia could only summon her brother's soul. The two completed their transformation and expanded into that ferocious two-headed wizard. Facing the menacing rank 4 Lesser Disaster Lord, Grimm, Hiri, and Chiolicia simultaneously took out their strongest forms and began to fight seriously. They had to admit that Evil Hoof's elemental control and coordination far surpassed them. Wizards were more like a group of elemental manipulators. Although they used various innate abilities and elemental affinity to link themselves with the elements, they could control the elemental energy as if they were their own arms. However, wizards were still wizards, and elements were still element. The two were not completely equal. Siahoof, on the other hand, was completely different. He seemed to have fused deeply with the earth element. Looking at how it launched its attack, it didn't need any spells or hand gestures to guide it at all. It could do whatever it wanted with just a thought. Hence, it could often use a simple earth elemental spell to block or dissolve Grimm's powerful fire spells. Moreover, it was extremely adept at turning mud to stone, turning stone to mud, and using the petrification ray. If he wanted to kill the fire wizard, he would need at least 80% of his power, and he would have to bear the brunt of the fire wizard's retaliation. As for the two-headed wizard, 20% of his power would be enough to deal with him. Therefore, as he fought, Siahoof quickly evaluated the situation. He had to admit that even with the help of the mutated beast army, it was still difficult for him to kill the 3 wizards in front of him. If he continued fighting like this, the gains would be completely disproportionate to the losses he had to pay. Therefore, after attacking wildly for a while, Siahoof returned to the top of the hill in the distance with a sway of his body. Under the command of its strange howl, the mutant beasts also stopped attacking and retreated to the small hill, gathering into a black mass. Human wizard, I, Lord Siahoof, have acknowledged your strength. If we continue fighting like this, our strength will be wasted for nothing. But how about this? Let's work together. Siahoof stood on the top of the hill, his mouth that looked like a blossoming rose petals flapping slowly, using his spiritual force to simulate a strange whistle. Work together? The 3 sorcerers, who were more or less injured, looked at each other, clearly not understanding what was going on. Grimm shook his huge body and slowly took 2 steps forward. He stared at Siahoof and yelled, "What do you mean by work together, sir? Wizard Hiri and the two-headed wizard also slowly retreated to Grimm's side, forming a new formation. However, the three wizards' power was too exclusive, and they could not completely trust each other. Therefore, they kept a safe distance of 100 to 200 meters between each other, not daring to enter another wizard's area of influence. This was also the norm among high-ranking wizards, so it was not surprising. Since you're here, you're probably here for the floating city, right? Xiahuf continued to negotiate. Grimm and the other two wizards looked at each other. Hiri and the two-headed wizard did not say anything, showing that they were completely following Grimm's orders. Regarding this, there was actually nothing to keep secret. After all, in this dangerous moment, a few wizards from another world sneaked into Morian Plain and quietly came to the floating city of Auspicious View Garden. It would be an insult to the other party's intelligence to say that they did not have any ulterior motive. After seeing Grimm's incarnation of a tall man nodding silently, Xiahuf's open mouth vibrated even more violently. Since we both have the same goal, and we can't kill each other, then let's work together. Xiahuf's ugly mouth pointed at Grimm. What I need are the lives and souls of the people in the floating city. You don't need these things, do you? What I need is the high-ranking knowledge and rare resources of the arcane kingdom stored in it. If you don't mind, I'm also interested in the energy core. Grimm pondered for a moment, then stated his needs. Xiahuf did not show any objection or dissatisfaction. I want the secrets of the arcane kingdom's high-ranking arcane puppets. Wizard Hiri also carefully stated his need. Originally, he wanted a lot of things, but on such an occasion, it was obviously very irrational to offend the little disaster lord by asking for too much. And in such a cooperation, everyone's gains were directly related to their own strength. In the battle just now, he did not show his strength that the other party was afraid of, so naturally, he could not ask for more. I want it too. The two-headed wizard was overjoyed when he saw this. Just as he was about to open his mouth to say his needs, a cold and terrifying mental force wrapped around his body, so he could only shut his mouth. Xiahuf obviously did not care about his or her strength. He was only allowed to join the team purely for the sake of the other two wizards. Therefore, a bonus like him or her naturally did not have the right to ask for anything. Anyway, the floating city was so big, it would be enough to just give him or her some leftover materials. After all, in the eyes of a disaster creature like Xiahuf, everything was determined by strength. Without strength, one could only wait to become someone else's prey. Looks like there's still room for cooperation. That floating city isn't that easy to deal with, there's still a Grand Arcanist left on it. Why don't we work together to kill him? His body and soul belong to me, and the rest of the equipment belongs to you. What do you think? Although Xiahuf's proposal was a little overbearing and decisive, it still attracted the interest of Grimm and the others. A Grand Arcanist? The mission information given by the A-team didn't mention this. Was it an oversight or intentional? Chapter 11:11. Auspicious View Garden, Floating Space City. The situation had become more and more serious. The news from the north proved that the Light of Truth Floating Space City had been attacked by the Star Beast. Although a clone of the Emperor of Arcane had defeated the enemy there, the scattered invaders still brought all kinds of unimaginable disasters and losses to the Arcane Kingdom. Remote villages and cities fell one after another, and areas of human settlements were slaughtered and burned down. There was not much time left for the Morian Plain. The upper echelons of the Arcane Kingdom were well aware of the disaster faced by the Morian realm, but when the news reached the middle echelons, the relevant content was much simpler and cruder. And when the news reached the ordinary Arcanists, the information was so vague that it was difficult to tell whether it was true or false. As for the ordinary people at the bottom of the realm, they were the targets of abandonment. Naturally, it was impossible for them to know what kind of disaster was about to befall them. The large-scale selection of arcane apprentices took place abruptly. It wasn't the time for the selection of arcane apprentices, but the floating space cities in various places had issued mandatory orders to the regions under their jurisdiction to select excellent arcane apprentices and send them to the floating space cities. A large number of excellent and talented children were selected and sent to the floating space cities one after another. The city, which was facing a great danger of war, was rejuvenated by the injection of a large number of living blood. The empire was retreating. Such news was no longer a secret, but it had become a heated topic of discussion among all arcanists and apprentices. Most of the arcanists were naturally included in the retreat list, but the arcane apprentices list was relatively small. As the center of arcana in Kentaslo, Ruyan province, the floating city of Ruyan had 30,000 arcana apprentices living, studying, and researching here. Together with the newly selected young fellows, the number was close to 50,000. According to the authoritative information circulated internally, the number of apprentices that the arcane kingdom could transfer was up to 4,000. After all, the entire arcane kingdom had 7 continents, more than 20 provinces, and 76 floating space cities. Even if each floating space city only selected 4,000 people, that was a huge number of nearly 300,000. Besides, apart from the future arcana apprentices, every floating city also required the relocation of a large batch of arcanists, arcana equipment, and all kinds of sophisticated instruments. There was also a huge amount of resources and materials, as well as all kinds of daily necessities. Therefore, those arcana apprentices who were not selected in the list of 4,000 people were also anxious to rush back to their families as soon as possible, and strive to occupy some better positions for themselves and their relatives in those safe fortresses. And in order to strengthen the prestige of their families and to seek a greater right to survival, they were also trying their best to win over some helpless high-grade apprentices. And Lucia, as a beauty with the title of senior apprentice in alchemy and puppet-making, naturally received the most olive branches. Unfortunately, Lucia was unmoved, and she simply refused everyone. She still went on as usual, shuttling between the arcane research room, the library and the arcane academy every day. On this day, Lucia, as usual, was holding a thick pile of arcane books and hurrying along the familiar white path, surrounded by apprentices who were also in a hurry. There was no smile on everyone's face, and there were no more relaxed young figures beside the soft beaches and beautiful fountains. The whole floating space city seemed to have fallen into a kind of low-pressure, depressing and painful. Lucia walked silently with her head down. It was not until she saw a familiar corner of a cloth robe and a pair of exquisite arcane leather boots that she stopped in surprise and raised her head. The person in front of him was the handsome young acolyte Sauron, who exuded a heroic aura. His brows were knitted, his face was haggard, and he looked like he was suffering from a lot of things. "Soren, you haven't left yet?" Lucia covered her mouth in surprise. Looking at Lucia's beautiful and bright eyes, Soren's dry mouth opened and closed several times, and finally spoke. "My grandfather has decided to evacuate today. Congratulations! I will bless you." Lucia's face showed a sincere smile. Soren's painful eyes carefully examined Lucia's face, but he could not find any trace of falsehood or pretense in her smile. "Grandpa has urged me to leave. I just want to ask you one last time, you really don't want to go with me?" Lucia slowly stopped smiling and shook her head solemnly again. "Lucia, I take back what I said before. I won't use this quota to force you to do anything anymore. You're free. Come with me, I won't force you to do anything you don't want, I just ask you to go with me, okay?" Soren said with difficulty. The expression on his face was painful and distorted. Obviously, he had made a great determination to make this decision. Lucia was stunned at first, and then a beautiful smile slowly bloomed on her face. She took a step forward, cupped Soren's face, and willingly gave her first kiss. However, Just when Soren was about to go crazy with joy and wanted to hold her, Lucia suddenly stepped back and got out of his arms. Soren, let's go. Lucia's little face was still red from the kiss just now, full of breathtaking brilliance. This kiss is our farewell gift. We may never see each other again, so I hope you can leave without any worries, for the future of the Empire, for the inheritance of Arcana civilization. No, Lucia, I can't leave you here. Soren fell from the peak of joy to the deep valley, obviously unable to accept the reality in front of him, and his voice was almost hoarse. I won't leave. The shyness on Lucia's face faded, but because of the strange look in her eyes, there was another layer of holy brilliance. My life belongs to Arcana. Even if I face death in the next moment, I will not stop my step. This is the oath I made when I was elected as an Arcana apprentice, and it is also the belief I have pursued all my life. So, even without this disaster, we are not destined to be together. I hope you can understand my feelings. Soren's expression was painful and sad. After a long time, he finally got out of the way to the Arcana Academy. Lucia took a deep look at him and hurriedly set off again. Looking at the pretty and determined figure, Soren felt as if his heart was being cut by a knife. Soren finally shed tears. Unknowingly, an old arcanist appeared beside Soren. He also silently looked in the direction where Lucia disappeared, and his eyes were full of loneliness and pain that couldn't be concealed. She's a good girl. Unfortunately, she doesn't belong to you. The old man said bleakly, if I were as carefree as she was, maybe I would make the same choice as her. Unfortunately, the old man lowered his head and adjusted his mentality, then raised his head again. Let's go, Soren. There's no hope here. The task of rebuilding a new Arcana kingdom in another world isn't easy. Your future isn't here, it's far away. The glory of Arcana, the glory of the family, we're all old. These can only be inherited and carried forward by you. So, cheer up, bite the bullet, for the Arcana kingdom, for the Jonas family, live strong. Soren's body trembled slightly. After a long time, he finally wiped his tears, turned to face his grandfather, nodded and said, I understand. Let's go, Grandpa. Chapter 11-12. The biggest change after the merger of the Calamities and the Magi was that the speed of their advancement had increased. According to secret intelligence, the world of gods, the Abyss world, the Titan Gold family, the Star Alliance, and other powerful astral beings had invaded the Morian plane. Therefore, every day they stayed here was a huge risk. With such a huge and profitable target like the floating city, there were definitely more than one or two that had their eyes on them. Moreover, among the missions given by the A Squadron, attacking the floating city at Auspicious View Gardens was the most important mission of this trip. Therefore, on the 7th day after forming an alliance with the Lesser Lord of Calamities, Grimm and his party rushed to the floating city day and night. The floating city of today was vastly different from what it had been in the past. There were obviously fewer towering arcane towers, and even the number of necessary arcane watchtowers had been reduced to an extremely low level. Below the floating city's massive body was a golden grassland where countless refugees from all directions gathered. They struggled to climb onto the floating discs, trying to hide in the floating city that had a sturdy arcane barrier. A large number of arcanists and apprentices were yelling and commanding the tall arcane puppets to maintain the order in this place. Among the crowd, there was also a long line of carriages and horses, transporting all kinds of materials and supplies that the floating city urgently needed. When Grimm, Heli, and Chio-Lisha climbed up a small hill and watched everything from afar, a large group of mutated beasts climbed over the hills, crossed the grassland, and began to appear below the floating city. Immediately, the people gathered below the floating city, waiting for the floating discs to arrive, began to panic. Countless men, women, old, and young screamed in fear, desperately fleeing into the distance. The frightened horses ran around in the crowd, making the situation more and more difficult to control. A few floating discs that had landed on the ground and were carrying supplies and people quickly rose up, wobbling as they flew towards the floating city. There were still many people clinging to the edge of the discs, screaming and crying for help. Finally, when the discs rose into the sky, the people clinging to the edge were exhausted, screaming and falling from the sky one by one. The arcanists and apprentices who stayed on the ground to control the situation had nowhere to run. They could only desperately command the arcane puppets to form a circle, protecting themselves and some of the refugees inside. Grimm could clearly see that the natives on the other side were like a swarm of ants. Outside of them, a black wave was rapidly approaching. There were all kinds of mutated beasts, and all of them were vicious and cruel. Thus, as soon as the two sides made contact, a clear line of blood erupted from the front of the battlefield. This place was close to the floating city, so the number of apprentices who had mastered basic arcana techniques had also increased. Amidst the crowd, energy balls of various colors rained down on the group of mutated beasts, exploding into flesh and blood and countless broken limbs. However, how could this bit of elemental attack stop the attacks of the mutated beasts? Like bubbles raised by an enormous tide, before anybody could cheer for them, the crazy aberrant beasts had lunged into the crowd and taught the arcanists a good lesson with their fierce bites and sharp claws. Creak, 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 3-meter-tall arcane puppets marched forward with heavy footsteps, pushing through the crowd and appearing in front of the group of mutated beasts. They were not metal puppets, but arcana creations that had been activated. There were not many metal parts on their bodies, and their entire bodies were pieced together by waves of arcana energy. There were only a few thin metal rings in a few key areas, binding the arcana energy into a humanoid form. After such a transformation, the physical attack and defense of the arcane puppets would definitely be greatly reduced, but they would strangely have the ability to cast arcana spells. As they strode forward, they raised their hands and shot out energy balls, the power of which was as high as 80 or 90 degrees. This kind of attack power was equal to that of a normal grade 1 wizard, but it was faster, almost one ball every 2 seconds. Facing this group of arcane puppets, the leaders of the group of mutated beasts immediately went berserk, charging into the crowd while enduring their attacks, starting a massacre. This batch of less than 30 arcane puppets did not even last for a quarter of an hour before they were quickly destroyed. Seeing that the situation was not good, the arcanists all leaped up, wanting to escape back to the floating city before the swarm of mutated beasts surrounded them. Unfortunately, they had acted a little too late. There was also a large number of flying beasts in the horde. They either had eagle wings or elytra wings on their back. When they saw that the arcana masters were trying to escape, they immediately flapped their wings and flew into the sky, surrounding them tightly. A few dazzling arcana spells swept past, and a dozen black and red beasts fell from the sky, wailing in pain. However, the arcanists who were surrounded could not break out of the encirclement. In the end, their external shields were broken, and after a series of fierce tearing and biting, they were cut into pieces, turning into bloody corpses. Only at this moment did the floating city finally react. A dozen arcane watchtowers circled around and suddenly descended from the clouds, pouring a terrifying torrent of arcane spells onto the most densely packed and closest areas of the swarm of mutated beasts. Naturally, the mutated beasts would not give up so easily. A large number of flying mutated beasts soared into the sky, quickly entangling with the arcane watchtowers. Arcanists might be very weak individually, unable to fight the mutated beasts head-on. But once they hid in the arcane watchtowers, with the support of the arcane facilities, their individual strength was instantly amplified more than 10 times. Even though there weren't many high-level arcana masters guarding the dozen or so arcana guard towers, the sturdy towers and the abundant arcana techniques within them were still able to hold their own against the horde of mutated beasts. In an instant, in the sky, all kinds of energy light swept across the horizon, and corpses fell like rain. Xiaoho, who was hiding among the mutated beasts, did not care about the casualties of his subordinates, but he could not let them die here for nothing. Therefore, while the arcane watchtowers were slaughtering the mutated beasts, the earth trembled, the soil cracked, and 3 huge stone puppets, each more than 10 meters tall, drilled out from the ground. As soon as these stone puppets appeared, they raised their beehive-like stone heads, raised their arms high, and condensed a huge stone between their palms. Then, with a wave of their arms, they smashed the flying arcane watchtowers with a whoosh. One of the arcane watchtowers could not dodge in time and was hit by 3 huge stones at the same time, immediately swaying and falling from the sky. The mutated beasts on the ground that were being trampled miserably roared as they surrounded it, quickly drowning it in the black beast tide. The remaining arcane watchtowers were furious when they saw this. 4 of them circled down and kept attacking the beasts that had piled up like a small mountain, trying to save their comrades. At the same time, more sentry towers released rapid lightning chains, which crazily struck at the 3 huge stone puppets. These 3 stone puppets were all at the pinnacle of Grade 2. Naturally, they could not be destroyed by mere energy lightning chains. The rocks on the surface of their bodies were scorched black, and many of them collapsed like mudslide. However, with a flash of yellow elemental light, a large amount of earth elemental energy flowed along their legs to the damaged parts of their bodies, quickly solidifying into a new layer of rock skin. As such, the 3 stone puppets were able to endure the attacks of the arcane watchtowers. The arcane watchtowers became even more anxious when they saw this. They actually hovered in the air, and began to communicate with the floating city above, guiding the real arcane watchtowers to attack even more fiercely. Seeing such a great opportunity, how could Xiaoho let it go so easily? He suddenly drilled out of the soil beneath the arcane watchtowers, raised his head and roared, using a huge yellowish-brown light to cover the 4 arcane watchtowers. Gravity Ring. A gravity ring personally released by a Grade 4 Lesser Disaster Lord. The 4 arcane guard towers immediately began to tremble, and they began to slide down continuously. Seeing that the situation was bad, the arcanists inside hurriedly poured even more arcane energy into the floating rings at the base of the watchtowers. Only then did they barely manage to resist the powerful pull of gravity, preventing themselves from falling from the sky. The arcanists panicked when they suddenly discovered the figure of the Grade 4 Lesser Disaster Lord. They shook the watchtowers, doing their best to break free from the gravity ring's influence. At the same time, they unleashed one arcane attack after another, raining down on the enemy. However, just as the arcane watchtowers and the gravity ring were locked in a stalemate, a deep-colored fireball streaked across the sky and struck the watchtowers. This time, the arcane watchtowers could no longer maintain their stability. One by one, they spun and fell from the sky, black smoke rising from their bodies. Several thousand meters away, Grim, who had transformed into a tall, flaming man, slowly stepped onto the battlefield with heavy footsteps. Under the ferocious attacks of his fireballs, the arcane watchtowers could not escape his attack range in time. One by one, they were shot down from the sky. Seeing that the situation was not good, the last 2 remaining arcane watchtowers turned around and tried to escape back to the floating city, only to be punched by a mysterious guy who descended from the sky, wrapped in strange silver armor, one after another, and smashed them straight into the sky. Without the advantage of flying, once the arcane watchtowers fell to the ground, they would no longer be able to break free from the encirclement of the mutated beast. Seeing that his 2 allies were quite capable and did not play any tricks, the Lesser Disaster Lord nodded in satisfaction. He had come here to reap the lives and souls of the floating city. How could he allow himself to be trapped on the ground? The Lesser Disaster Lord stood proudly on the ground, and for the first time, he began to use the earth elemental energy in his body. As he opened his mouth, all the earth elemental energy in the ground began to gather around his body. In the next second, a thick stone pillar shot up into the sky, carrying the evil hoof up into the sky. The mutated beasts that could fly flapped their wings, circling around the stone pillars as they quickly flew above the clouds. Even more mutated beasts leaped up and used their sharp claws to climb onto the stone pillars, fighting to be the first to charge towards the floating city. Chapter 11:13. When the mutated beasts appeared on the floating city, the Arcanists were already prepared for battle. Rows of arcana puppets formed a dense phalanx, blocking the Arcanists' path. They came in all kinds of shapes and sizes, covering most of the positions on the battlefield. At the very front was a row of especially tall and sturdy arcana puppets. Most of them were already 10 meters tall. Compared to other puppets, their bodies were almost completely covered in metal components, and they were especially thick and sturdy. The surface of the metal components was etched with all kinds of strange magic patterns and arcane spells. The surging arcane energy in their bodies seeped through the gaps between the components, condensing into an arcane barrier on the surface of their bodies. The sturdiness of red copper, coupled with the good magic conductivity of magic silver, made them powerful war puppets that cultivated both magic and martial arts. Their weapons were the huge metal fists and the terrifying giant legs that were 2 meters thick. When they stood in a row and charged at the enemy, the whole world would tremble and tremble. Behind the war puppets were rows of 3-meter-tall battle puppets that were carved and polished to look like steel knights. They were like human knights wearing full sets of steel armor, holding 2 steel swords that were 1.5 meters long in their hand. They followed closely behind the war puppets, waving the swords in their hands as if they were flying. It was obvious that they were playing the role of a guerrilla. Behind the steel guards were a large number of ordinary arcana puppets. Although they were slightly weaker in melee combat, they all had the strange ability to release energy balls. Therefore, they played the role of long-range attackers in the team. As for the human arcanists, they all hid in their arcana towers, where they controlled the powerful arcana facilities and created a storm of lightning above the battlefield. On a battlefield like this, there was almost no space for arcana apprentices to use their abilities. Therefore, they were all sent to the inner ring of the floating city and concentrated there for protection. At the beginning, there were very few mutated beasts that charged up the floating city, and they couldn't break through the strong defense line formed by the arcane puppets at all. One aberrant beast after another charged forward, but before they touched the war puppets in the first row, they were blown into smithereens by the raining energy balls. But as time went on, more and more mutated beasts rushed up the stone pillars to the floating city. Even the sky was occupied by mutated beasts of black and red color, roaring as they flew. There was a dull thud. The evil hoof appeared in front of the arcane puppet's defensive line with a powerful aura. It looked at the puppets and raised its body, its lotus petal-shaped mouth trembling rapidly. It was as if a trumpeter had sounded the charge horn. More and more mutated beasts immediately roared and charged at the puppet defense line. The lightning storm that had long gathered at the front lines of the battlefield erupted. Thick bolts of lightning struck down, electrifying the aberrant beasts one after another. Green smoke rose from their bodies, and their life energy dropped rapidly. But the aberrant beasts were obviously not afraid of death. They were like a flood that had opened the floodgates, crossing the minefield and colliding head-on with the first row of war puppets. The war puppets that were like steel giants stood still, kicking and punching, forcibly cutting the black torrent into even finer black lines. The aberrant beasts that broke through the war puppets immediately tangled with the steel guards. Dong dong dong, boom boom boom, kacha kacha kacha, all kinds of strange sounds intertwined at the front lines of the battlefield, deafening, and the smell of blood rose to the sky. With a dull thud, Grimm stepped out of an exploding ring of flames, ignoring the few aberrant beasts that had been burnt to ashes beside him. He focused his eyes and peered at the battlefield from afar. At this time, the battle was mainly concentrated in the outer ring. A large number of arcanists sent by the floating city, with the help of the arcane puppets and arcane towers, forcibly blocked the aberrant beasts outside. Within his field of vision, there was a battlefield of blood and flesh flying everywhere. There were death zones overflowing with energy everywhere. On the contrary, the inner ring of the floating city was unusually quiet. What do you think? Let's charge into the inner ring and kill some people while we're at it, shall we? A few hundred meters away from Grim, Wizard Holly, who was wrapped in his ectoplasm armor, had just set foot on the surface of the floating city. Behind the two of them, Chiolicia had used some unknown method to hide herself, and was also secretly peeking at the battlefield. The Arcanist's line of defense can only stop the aberrant beasts, not us. However, we don't know anything about the situation inside. If we just charge in like this, it'll be easy for us to be ambushed by the Arcanists. Grim thought for a moment and rejected Wizard Holly's suggestion. Then what you're saying is, Wizard Holly said hesitantly, help Hoof open up a path in the line of defense and let some of the aberrant beasts into the inner ring. Then, we'll sneak in and do something big. This way, with the aberrant beasts distracting us, the chances of us being ambushed will be much lower. All right, we'll do as you say. After a simple discussion, the two extremely daring magi immediately began to move. When it came to overcoming difficulties, Wizard Holly, who had the ectoplasm armor, was much easier to deal with than Grim. He mixed in with the group of aberrant beasts and continued to advance forward. It was Evil Hoof. It was the one who blocked that attack. Grim's burning eyes swept over. That Evil Hoof emerged from the group of alienated beasts and roared ferociously. Attack! Attack! Keep attacking! Just focus on attacking that big guy. I'll block the rest for you. If you can take it down, I'll give you a lot of resources. You mean what you say? Watch me. Wizard Holly was overjoyed, and the thick beam of light between his palms became more and more intense. Grim sneered and continued to stride forward. As he moved forward, he shot out dark and restrained fireballs from his hands. These fireballs were obviously different from normal witchcraft fireballs. They contained a strong and strange power of the law of fire. Even if it was a lifeless arcane puppet, it would still feel a strange pain when hit by a fireball like this. Those rank 1 arcane puppets were engulfed by the fireballs, and the metal rings around them would immediately melt. Therefore, Grim's blazing fireballs were like cannonballs exploding in the formation of arcane puppets, blowing them to the ground one by one. It was like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. Even those rank 2 steel guards could not withstand the bombardment of 2 or 3 blazing fireballs. Therefore, under Grim's crazy bombardment, a path of fire appeared through the puppet's defensive line. Just as the Arcanists were frantically trying to deploy arcane puppets from other regions to fill in the gaps, a series of explosions suddenly rang out from within the 10-meter-tall war puppet's body. Countless metal parts and components on its body were blasted away. It swayed its huge body, staggered 2 steps forward, and finally fell to the ground on its back. When its heavy body fell, it even crushed the ground that had been strengthened by hundreds of arcane spells. The fall of the war puppet also opened a path to the inner ring on the main battlefield that stretched for several kilometers. Countless aberrant beasts trampled over its remains, traversing the path of flames and charging unstoppably towards the inner ring of the floating city. Chapter 11:14. The defensive line had been breached. Not only did this give the floating city a hole in the defensive line, it also caused the entire battle to go out of control. Today's battle was not really a battle of attack and defense. The goal of victory was to wipe out the enemy's forces. It was a battle of slaughter. The mutated beasts that were eager to break through the defensive line were like a pack of hungry wolves. They did not have the time and energy to fight with the shepherd dogs. Once they found a hole in the sheepfold, they would swarm in and vent their ferocity and cruelty on the trembling lambs. Who were the lambs? The Arcana apprentices that were large in number but did not have enough power to protect themselves. After breaking through the defensive line, the mutated beasts still had to break through the numerous arcana towers. If it were a group of slightly more rational attackers, they would have taken out these arcana towers one by one in order to reduce the casualties of the team. However, this group of mutated beasts could not be estimated with common sense. They did not have the thought of attacking the city or seizing the flag. Their minds were only filled with blood, slaughter, and delicious souls. Therefore, the swarm of mutated beasts swarmed over and paved a path of blood between the narrow and rugged arcana towers, extending all the way to the inner ring of the floating city. At this point, the mutated beasts were no longer in the mood to fight against the cold and hard arcana towers. Instead, they rushed into the arcana facilities one after another, using their terrifying numbers and powerful individual strength to slaughter and harvest the lives and souls of the middle-rank and low-rank arcanists and apprentices. Grimm and the other two were not interested in helping the evil hooves to continue fighting. They followed the torrent into the inner ring and began to crazily plunder. At this time, no one would gather together and affect their time to plunder resources and knowledge. Therefore, the three wizards naturally split up. Grimm exited his flame giant form and returned to his human form. Wrapped in a layer of golden flames, his figure became invisible. He leisurely followed the group of mutated beasts, continuing to advance into the inner ring of the floating city. Along the way, they saw many strangely shaped arcana facilities, and they could detect the auras of a large number of arcanists. However, Grimm did not seem to notice them at all. He simply ignored them and headed straight for the tallest arcane palace in the inner ring of the floating city. Since he had come to this world of arcane magic, it would be a waste for him to risk his life a few times if he did not search for some necessary knowledge and resources. And in the floating city, where was the most likely place to store the profound arcana knowledge? Of course, it was the most central and eye-catching arcana palace. Therefore, relying on the stealth ability of the Law of Fire, Grimm broke through the tight blockade formed by the arcana towers and passed by many arcana facilities that looked like libraries and laboratories. He even stopped in his tracks and watched as a group of arcanists directed a large number of arcane puppets towards the front lines. These arcana puppets were all very new. Grimm could even see signs of shoddy workmanship and hasty work on them. From this, it could be seen that the defensive power of the floating city he was in had been squeezed to a certain limit and was operating in overload. This was undoubtedly good news for Grimm. The power of the floating city was so obvious that it did not seem to be some kind of disguise. This also meant that in the following battles and breakthroughs, it was unlikely that they would encounter any fatal trap. And this was also the only thing that Grimm was worried about. Buildings were being torn down one after another. The sky was filled with strange monsters with black wings and crocodiles' heads. They screamed shrilly and shuttled back and forth between the bright energy rays of the arcana towers. Every time they saw an arcanist or an apprentice, they would dive down with shrill screams and grab the enemy into the sky with a series of violent explosions. Then, they would tear the enemy into pieces of bloody meat and devour them alive. On the ground, all kinds of strange black and red mutated beasts roamed around. Almost every arcana building was surrounded by a large group of monsters. After they tore apart the defensive arcana puppets, they charged into the buildings. Soon, all kinds of heart-wrenching screams came from inside. However, these screams would stop very quickly. Then, all kinds of scary sounds of chewing and swallowing could be heard. Grimm strolled leisurely between the battlefields and slaughterhouses. He could see very clearly that transparent blue light spots were floating out from various parts of the floating city. They circled in the air for a while and slowly floated towards where Evil Hoof's aura was. He did not know what method Evil Hoof used to cut off the path of these souls to return to the Mother Spirit River. However, he could guess that it must have something to do with the use of rule power. Otherwise, Grimm could not imagine what kind of witchcraft or spell could be so powerful that it could interfere with the operation of the plane's laws in such a large area. According to the agreement, the life energy and souls that were harvested belonged to Evil Hoof. Therefore, Grim only observed silently for a while, and did not try to intercept any of the Arcanist's souls. Wizard Holly and Chiolicia had already scattered. Only an idiot would not rush to plunder resources and treasures here. Although the three of them had formed a team on this floating city that was full of treasures, no one was willing to follow behind another strong Arcanist and eat the leftovers. Therefore, Grim was not surprised at all when they left. However, Grim knew in his heart that their actions were unwise. After all, apart from the normal Arcanists in the floating city, there was also a fifth Circle Grand Arcanist. However, it was not the Grand Arcanist named Fra that Grim was afraid of, but another terrifying enemy, the Lesser Lord of Calamity, Sia Hoof. After working together to rush into the floating city, the relationship between the two sides had changed drastically. Evil Hoof's words about working together to deal with the fifth Circle Grand Arcanist could be true. Perhaps in Evil Hoof's eyes, a few scattered rank 4 wizards were easier to kill than a fifth Circle Grand Arcanist. Therefore, after parting ways with Wizard Holly and Chiolicia, Grim remained invisible and roamed around the battlefield. He did not go out to steal any resources or treasures. His purpose was to not let Evil Hoof know his location, so as to avoid unnecessary covetous thoughts. At a crossroad leading to the Inner Circle Arcana Palace, 3/4 Circle Arcanists stood in a triangular formation, surrounded by a circle of arcane puppets of different shapes, silently guarding this place. In front of them, hundreds of mutant beasts were launching waves of fierce attacks. The thick layers of corpses on the periphery of the battlefield were enough to show the intensity and bloodiness of the battle here. The 3 Arcanists surrounded a spell pool with a diameter of 10 meters. The walls of the pool were made of white-gray stones, and the purest arcane energy flowed in it. The 4 walls of the spell pool were covered with all kinds of strange patterns and arcane runes. From time to time, they would vibrate with the arcane energy in the pool, overflowing with dazzling arcane light. One had to admit that the spell pool was one of the greatest arcane inventions of the Arcane Kingdom. Although the spell pool looked inconspicuous, it was one of the most secure centers of the entire floating city. Usually, the tens of thousands of Arcanists and apprentices in the floating city would come to the spell pool to meditate in their spare time and store part of their mental power into the spell pool, condensing arcana models and storing them there. In this way, as long as they were still in the arcane secret network, they could use their usual stored arcane models from the spell pool at any time and anywhere. Moreover, to a certain extent, the inner arcane secret network allowed them to borrow or overdraft some arcane models. This also meant that once the Arcanists stepped onto the battlefield, they would be able to use the least amount of mental energy to summon high-level arcana spell models, and they would be able to cast them instantaneously. Therefore, the 3 Arcanists stood with their backs against the spell pool. Every time they waved their arcane scepters, they would be able to shoot out a terrifyingly powerful and fast high-level arcane spell. Chapter 11:15. A large number of terrifying earth spears rose from the ground and quickly overturned where the 3/4 ring Arcanists were. An Arcana Master's agonized howl could be heard amidst the thick smoke that filled the air. When the dust and stone fragments dispersed, only 2 Arcanists were still intact around the magic pool that stood like a forest of spears. The other Arcanist had half of his body pierced through by a thick earth spear, and he was hung high up in the air. The 2 Arcanists who had escaped death were still covered in the glow of their Arcana shield. However, the Arcana shields had also been severely challenged by the fierce attack just now. Hence, the light on the surface of the Arcana shields was dim, and seemed to be on the verge of breaking. The 4th ring Arcana Master wearing the earth spear spikes obviously hadn't experienced much tempering, and his constitution was shockingly low. Therefore, before his 2 companions could save him, he was already on the verge of death. This was the result of Arcanists focusing too much on accumulating arcane knowledge and neglecting constitution. If it was a normal wizard, even a grade 3 wizard, they would not have been killed so easily by Siahuf. As the ground shook, Siahuf emerged from the ground as if he was walking on water. The black scales on his body were covered in large scorch marks, as if he had just gone through a terrifying energy explosion. Judging from the way he had appeared, the other two arcanists immediately realized what had happened. You're the one who destroyed the energy core underground. They roared angrily and waved their arcane scepters, pointing at Siahuf. However, after a gust of cold wind, nothing happened. There were no rays of light, no energy balls, not even a drop of arcane energy appeared. The expressions of the two fourth ring arcanists changed again. Only then did they realize that because of the explosion of the energy core underground, the spell pool behind them had completely lost its effect. For thousands of years, arcanists had gotten used to relying on arcane facilities to fight. If they ran out of arcane energy, they would borrow it from the mana pool. If they ran out of arcane spells, they would borrow it from the spell pool. No matter what kind of enemy they faced, as long as the Arcana Master's arcana techniques were still working, they would be able to use all sorts of arcana techniques to torture them to death. However, now that the mana pool had been destroyed, the spell pool had also been destroyed. This made the arcanists who had relied on them to fight all year round really feel a little uncomfortable. Just as the two Arcana Masters hesitated for a moment, Siahuf's figure flashed and appeared next to one of them. The yellow mist corroded through the Arcana shield, and a petrifying ray struck the Arcana Master's body. Among the Arcana tools he had thrown out, there were silver statues that could turn into exquisite Arcana puppets, Arcana scrolls that emitted rays of silver light, and some strange fruits that could quickly turn into spiritual shockwaves. Finally, with the help of these miscellaneous Arcana tools, he managed to stall Siahuf for 3 seconds. Fortunately, he managed to escape the scene and hide in one of the Arcana towers. After killing and devouring the flesh and souls of two fourth ring Arcana Masters, Siahuf was immediately energized. Even the violent energy shockwaves on his body had recovered a lot. Thus, under his command, a large group of mutated beasts broke through the broken spell pool and pounced toward the Arcana Hall behind. There, he sensed the aura of the fifth ring Great Arcana Master. After watching the battle between Siahuf and the other Arcana Masters, Grimm felt agitated and uneasy. In terms of vitality and combat ability, Siahuf was far superior to him. Even if he used all his strength, it would be impossible for him to defeat such an opponent. On the contrary, the chances of him dying were as high as 39%. However, if Grimm wanted to escape, it would be difficult for Siahuf to stop him. In Grimm's mind, the information that the AI chip had gathered based on the shockwaves from the battle was extremely eye-catching. Siahuf, Lesser Lord of Calamity, Rank 4, Earth Element. Stats: Strength 31, Vitality 46, Agility 36, Spirit 42. Mastered Skills: All mid to high rank Earth Element abilities, Earth Mist Erosion, Rank 4, Petrification Ray, Rank 4, Ring of Gravity, Rank 4. Arcana Master, 4th Ring. Strength Attribute Unknown. Stats: Strength 8, Vitality 14, Agility 6, Spirit 43. Abilities: Mastery of Arcana Techniques, Puppet Creation, Affinity with Arcana. The difference in their basic strength was so great that it was like the difference between heaven and earth. With such a difference in strength, it was no wonder that the Arcana Masters were as fragile as paper in front of Siahuf once they lost the support of arcane facilities such as the Arcana Tower, the Mana Pool, and the Spell Pool. Grimm clearly disagreed with the Arcana Masters, who relied heavily on external resources. As a spellcaster, the necessary research and experiments were necessary, but they could not give up on the tempering of the body and the sharpening of the will to fight. In the sorcerer world, all sorcerers must prioritize the improvement of their combat power. Only when their own combat power could guarantee their own safety would they spend a certain amount of effort and resources on research that they were interested in. Otherwise, what was the use of research if they lost their lives? That was why the arcana masters living in the Morian plane were far more thorough in their research and pursuit of the truth than the sorcerers. Unfortunately, they were good at research but bad at protecting themselves. When the entire arcane kingdom was in danger, there was almost no one who could stand up and turn the tide. Grimm could only sympathize with them. After all, the multiverse was a world of violent turbulence. If they wanted to steadily climb the ladder of technology, occupy territory, and crush their opponents with technology that was far superior to theirs. Such an idea was beautiful, but it was unrealistic. Instead, it was better to focus on pragmatism and individual strength like the sorcerers. They concentrated most of the resources in the hands of a few sorcerers and piled up a super strong force that would make foreign enemies feel awe. Only in this way could they restrain the enemy's desire to pounce on them and fight for a certain development and reproduction opportunity for their own camp and successors. The reason why the sorcerer world was able to stand firm in the world of many powerful races was inextricably linked to the 3 great rank 9 sorcerers. Unfortunately for the arcane kingdom, the 2 arcane emperors had only reached rank 8. Such strength was obviously not enough to scare away those greedy and cruel enemies. Grimm slowly stepped forward and jumped into the broken spell pool. He used the chip to scan the strange runes etched on the wall of the pool. After making sure that nothing was missed, he got out, took a look at the arcane palace in the distance, turned around and walked in another direction. There were too many places in the entire floating city that were worth a trip. There was no need for him to squeeze with Siehoof. If he guessed correctly, Siehoof should be heading straight for the rank 5 arcanist. Although the 2 sides had agreed on the priority of dividing the spoils after killing the rank 5 arcanist, the agreement itself was absurd. If the 3 sorcerers really helped Siehoof kill the rank 5 arcanist, perhaps it wouldn't be the division of the spoils, but a new battle would break out. Chapter 11-16. Auspicious View Garden, Floating City. The flames of war had spread to every corner of the city. However, just as the mutant beasts and the arcanists were entangled with each other, 2 strange figures slowly appeared in the sky. One was a man, tall and sturdy, covered with short, black, hard brown hair, with a wolf's head on his neck. The other one was a petite fox girl with a gentle figure. She had a furry red tail that trailed behind her, making her look exceptionally eye-catching. Hee, I didn't expect this place to be breached by the mutant beasts just half a day later. What should we do, Ruth? Where should we go first? The werewolf spoke. While speaking, this werewolf fiercely scanned the battlefield with his ferocious, scarlet eyes. A fierce, domineering, and oppressive aura was unmistakable. Why are you afraid? Didn't we already find out before coming here? The one who invaded here is that bastard Siehoof. Based on its nature, it was definitely alone and reckless. We just need to follow him and take advantage of the fiercest battle between him and the Grand Arcanist. The fox girl had a fox's head on her neck with sharp teeth. Although her words were fierce, there was an indescribable charm and tenderness in her big eyes. Especially on her forehead, a crescent-shaped jasper gem slightly emitted a strange light. You think I'm afraid of Siehoof? Humph, if that guy wasn't so good at escaping, I would have broken his neck last time. This time, you just wait for a good show. See how I'm going to deal with that guy who likes to dig around underground. After saying that, the werewolf raised his nose and fiercely sniffed. A strange look appeared on the black wolf's face. No, other than that Siehoof, why do I smell the stench of those evil sorcerers here? Damn it, did Siehoof join forces with the sorcerers? Hee, that guy Siehoof would never sincerely join forces with anyone. In my opinion, he must have used some tricks to trick a few sorcerers to help him, and then wait until the matter is done before taking the opportunity to eat them. This is his usual trick. The fox girl curled her lips in disdain. So, who should we kill first? Are you an evil hoof or a wizard? At the mention of slaughter, the werewolf's muscles swelled up even more, and even his body grew a bit larger than before. "Let's kill the wizards first, so that they don't interfere when we fight Evil Hoof later." Fox Girl Ruth was obviously not a good person, so she made up her mind immediately. "Follow me, I've already locked onto the stench of a magus." The werewolf opened his mouth full of sharp teeth and licked his lips. Then, he took the lead and charged into the sky. Meanwhile, the vixen's fox tail swayed behind her, and her entire body became a lot more hazy and illusory. She turned into a shadow and followed closely behind her werewolf companion, hurriedly pouncing toward a certain arcane building in the center of the floating city. The one they chose was none other than Wizard Holly. It couldn't be helped. Ever since they entered the inner ring of the floating city, Grim and Chiolicia had not revealed themselves. They had completely concealed their auras. It was no wonder that the two orcs found Holly, who was madly attacking a puppet factory, as soon as they appeared. This was a puppet factory full of high-tech aura. On rows of crystal lathes, there were nearly 100 semi-finished arcane puppets lying on their back. Each crystal lathe was a small control station that could accommodate 3 arcane apprentices working at the same time. Their task was to etch the necessary arcane runes on the surface of the metal parts of the arcane puppet. Depending on the proficiency of the arcana apprentices, a puppet factory could produce 10 to 15 Moa-I standard battle puppets or 20 to 25 Sophia 3 general-purpose puppets every day. They were all public property of the Floating Cities Arcanist Association. Unfortunately, due to the problem with the energy core of the floating city, this puppet factory also lost the support of arcane energy and could not continue to work. When Wizard Holly found this place and wanted to break in, he was surrounded by the arcane guards. As for the 5 arcanists and 70 arcane apprentices who were trapped in the factory, although they were also doing their best to attack the 3-meter-tall elemental construct, it was obvious that they could not pose any threat to the enemy. Just when Wizard Holly used brute force to take down a few high-grade arcane puppets and was about to rush in and plunder to his heart's content, he suddenly stopped and turned around to look at the path he came from. In his vision, a ferocious wolf head was rapidly expanding, accompanied by 10 frightening claws that flashed with a cold light. "There's an enemy." Before Wizard Hori could finish his thought, his body, which was covered in his ectoplasm armor, started to creak as the claws of the 10 wolves scratched him. The other party opened its huge, wide mouth and ruthlessly bit towards Wizard Helly's slightly slender neck. As the huge mouth opened and closed, dark gray saliva flowed out from the gaps between the messy and sharp teeth, emitting a strong sour smell. This sudden attack caused Holly to be a little flustered. After all, he was only a magic puppet master whose profession was to create puppets. Although he had strong close and long-range combat abilities, compared to a professional fighter, he was still a lot weaker. Moreover, this werewolf's attack was a little too ferocious. From the time Holly sensed the alarm spell formation was triggered to the time he turned around to face the battle, only 3 short seconds had passed. However, the werewolf had already traversed a distance of almost 500 meters and appeared directly in front of him. Moreover, the other party did not have the slightest intention of negotiating. The moment it appeared, it directly attacked with a deadly blow. Holly's elemental armor was fused with a large amount of astral matter. It was not known for its physical defense, but it was best for its magic resistance and magic disturbance properties. Therefore, under the fierce bite of the werewolf's huge mouth, the metal armor that was as thick as 4 fingers actually started to twist and deform. It looked like it was going to be bitten through in one bite. The sharp blades on the werewolf's left and right front claws had already sunk deep into the armor. With the great force of tearing, 10 terrifying claw marks were left on the surface of the armor. Holly felt the intense pain from his body and the terrifying power crushing down on him. The fear and deep fear in his heart instantly reached the peak of his emotions, unable to go any further. Following his ear-piercing scream of fear, a majestic pillar of starlight descended from the sky, enveloping himself and the werewolf at the same time. The starlight, which was soaked in dense killing intent, circled around the werewolf's sturdy body like countless fireflies. It ignored the other party's short, thick, and black fur, as well as the wild, surging energy, and disappeared into the werewolf's body like birds returning to the forest. As the starlight continuously entered, the scary werewolf that was crazily biting Holly couldn't help but let out a muffled groan. Between the glossy black fur, there was a silver glow, and the power of its attack was also slightly weaker than before. "Go to hell!" Wizard Holly, who was extremely frightened, clenched his fists and fiercely struck out, but the werewolf twisted its body and dodged it. Afterward, the werewolf's two thick hind legs gave a powerful kick on the ectoplasm armor, kicking both Holly and his armor away. Wizard Holly flew out in a straight line and heavily smashed into a stone wall. After leaving a deep hole on the wall, he bounced back and rolled a few times on the ground. The deep hole on the wall was deeply sunken, and the stone wall where he hit had already been smashed into mud. Around the hole were terrifying cracks that were as dense as spider webs. Wizard Holly struggled to crawl up from the ground, panting violently. The deep claw marks and bite marks on his body were flowing with purplish-black blood. However, under the illumination of the resplendent pillar of starlight, the wounds on the surface of the ectoplasm armor were also quickly healing and recovering. Following a rapid murmur, a beautiful silver-white starlight gathered between Wizard Holly's palms. More and more gathered, and the energy aura became stronger and stronger. However, Wizard Holly didn't care about this at all. His gaze was still fixed on that scary werewolf. That werewolf, on the other hand, used the momentum of the stomp to fly out lightly and landed on the ground 100 meters away. Its entire body was half-crouched on the ground, its front slightly bent, and its back slightly arched. Its two thick hind legs were ready to attack. Looking at its posture, it could unleash its strength at any time and attack Wizard Holly again. However, when the werewolf's ruthless gaze landed on the starlight in Wizard Holly's hand, its scarlet eyes couldn't help but slightly shrink. A faint trace of fear and anger appeared on its face. The starlight in its opponent's hand was too strange. It actually had the terrifying ability to ignore defense and magic resistance. Therefore, in that short exchange just now, Wizard Holly was at a huge disadvantage on the surface. Even his original body, which was hiding in the ectoplasm armor, was severely injured. On the other hand, the werewolf was completely unharmed. However, only that werewolf knew the truth. It was only a short 2 to 3 finger exchange, but that sinister and frightening starlight had actually caused quite a bit of damage to its internal organs. Therefore, it used the momentum to jump away. It looked like it was adjusting its posture, but it was actually trying to buy time for its body to recover. After all, the regenerative ability of the werewolf race's body was also abnormally terrifying. Werewolf? Believer of the orc god. Wizard Holly's gaze swept across the werewolf's body and quickly identified its identity. As soon as he identified the werewolf's identity, his body slightly retreated. The starlight in his hand suddenly turned into a beautiful halo and slowly flowed in all directions. As expected, wherever the starlight went, 20 meters to the right of his body, a slim and petite figure suddenly appeared. "Damn it, it really has a companion!" Wizard Holly cursed in a low voice, his mouth full of blood. He waved his hand, and a ball of bright starlight fell from the sky, smashing towards the new enemy that had been washed out by the starlight. "Hee hee, you wizards really have a lot of tricks up your sleeves." Fox Girl Ruth was naturally angry that her sneak attack didn't work. As she revealed her graceful and beautiful figure, she threw a flirtatious glance at Wizard Holly. At the same time, she raised her slender hand and propped up a blood-chi barrier to block the bombardment of the starlight. Behind her, her fox tail gently swayed. It seemed like she was seducing people with her seductive posture, but in secret, A dozen or so unremarkable fine hairs shot out from her fox tail. Chapter 11:17. If it had been anyone else, they might have fallen for the fox lady's charm. However, since Wizard Hiri dared to participate in this mission, he naturally had some good stuff on hand. As for wizards, the protection of their spiritual consciousness was undoubtedly the most important among all spellcasters. With the help of the psychic pin, Wizard Hiri and the others grunted and resisted the fox lady's charm. With a sweep of his spiritual consciousness, he discovered the other party's secret movements. Wizard Hiri raised his arm and covered his face with it. Puff, 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 strange sounds rang out, and more than 10 seemingly light and soft fox tail hairs pierced straight into the astral armor, almost half of it going in. Wizard Hiri was shocked. One had to know that his astral armor was condensed and solidified by his strong willpower and astral matter. This astral matter was good at disturbing magic, but it was not good at defense. However, as an astral matter, its basic toughness was far stronger than most of the metals in the material plane. Yet, these strange fox hairs could actually pierce through the astral armor that was far stronger than normal magic alloys. This was enough to prove that their sharpness and armor-piercing effects were not the least bit weaker than high-grade magic weapons. Wizard Hiri carefully guarded while slowly moving his body to avoid being caught in a pincer attack by the werewolf and the fox lady. He raised his right hand, which was covered in star armor, and gently wiped the wound on his left arm. Under the corrosion of the silver starlight, the fox tails immediately turned into powder and scattered down. At this time, the werewolf had already quickly healed his injuries and was eager to fight again. The two of you. Wait a minute, the two of you. Seeing the opponent's stance, Wizard Holly hurriedly gathered the starlight to protect himself and yelled, "We don't have any enmity between us. There's no need to fight to the death, right? Kakik. There are two of us and only one of you. We're all at grade 4, are you sure you can escape?" The werewolf laughed coldly. From his words, it seemed that he was not ashamed of fighting with numbers, but rather proud of it. "Humph, don't be too arrogant. I didn't come here alone. I also have companions here. Once I summon my companions and expand the battle needlessly, it won't do anyone any good." Wizard Holly continued to be cautious. Everyone is here to plunder resources and treasures. There's no need to leave so many good things behind. Instead, we're fighting to the death here. What you're saying seems to make sense. The vixen raised her pretty face as if she had been tempted by his words. Yes, yes. This is the largest puppet factory in the floating city. I've already killed all the arcane guards inside, so I can give it to you now. That should be fine, right? Seeing that the wargen was still as fierce as before, Wizard Holly couldn't help but grit his teeth and threatened, "Don't forget, I'm also a rank 4 wizard. If you push me too far, I can still drag one of you down with me. You don't want to end up in a life-and-death struggle, do you?" "Not bad, not bad. What you said makes sense. You can go now." Fox Girl Ruth nodded with a face full of smiles. She looked at Wizard Holly with eyes full of ridicule and disdain. "What do you mean? Don't force me." Seeing the Fox Girl's unfriendly gaze, Wizard Holly couldn't help but increase his vigilance. Endless starlight rolled on the surface of the armor, making it thicker. However, just as he was crazily controlling the starlight, an inexplicable dizziness made his vision go black, and he almost fell straight to the ground. "I've been hit? When did I get hit?" "That's right, wolf claws." Wizard Holly instantly understood everything. He raised his eyes and looked at the sharp claws and the wolf's mouth of that wargen. Sure enough, there were strands of black smoke lingering on them. It looked like it was filled with poison. "Hee, now you know why we've been talking with you for so long, right? We've been waiting for you to be poisoned. Fall to the ground now." Following the vixen's signal, that wargen violently jumped up. His whole body turned into a black lightning, and in an instant, he appeared next to Wizard Holly. This time, the Wargen had learned his lesson. He no longer fought head-on with Wizard Holly's sturdy armor. Instead, he quickly ran around Wizard Holly's body. While dodging the bombardment of his opponent's palm and the starlight falling from above, he used his cold, sharp claws to carve out terrifying crisscrossing claw marks on his opponent's armor. As for that fox girl, she was faintly discernible on the outskirts of the battlefield. Every time she appeared, she would throw flirtatious glances at Wizard Holly or blow him a kiss. Then, before Wizard Holly could retaliate, she would giggle and disappear again. This was not some kind of infatuation on the battlefield. It was a natural ability of fox girls. With the continuous bewitching of humans, and her natural charm, even if Wizard Holly had a powerful spirit pin to protect his soul, there was still a high chance of him being bewitched. With the tenacity of Wizard Holly's soul, even if Fox Girl Ruth used her full strength, she could only bewitch him with 2 or 3 fingers at most. Don't think that these 2 or 3 fingers would disappear in a flash, but they could still cause him a lot of damage. After all, Wizard Holly was currently on the battlefield, fighting a life-or-death battle with that Wargen. Every time he was bewitched, he would automatically disperse the starlight that he had gathered with great difficulty or reduce the thickness of his astral armor. This would greatly affect the situation of the battle. Under the fox girl's interference, Wizard Holly, who had the wolfsbane on his body acting up, made several fierce counterattacks, but they were all strangled into nothingness. Seeing that his defeat was right in front of him, Wizard Holly no longer dared to put on a brave front. He turned around and wanted to escape into the distance. Unfortunately, before he could even take 2 steps, the werewolf appeared in front of him in a flash, firmly blocking his path of escape. The fox girl giggled and appeared behind him. Her fox tail swung out a charming red mist, blocking his escape route. "I'll fight you to the death." At the juncture of life and death, Wizard Holly no longer thought about anything else. He roared and pounced towards that Wargen with his arms wide open. Boom! Amidst the terrifying sound of an earth-shattering explosion, the strange armor that was soaked in endless starlight suddenly burst out in all directions, exploding into a huge mushroom cloud on the spot. The wild explosive force left a huge, bottomless pit with a diameter of nearly 100 meters on the stone floor of the floating city. The endless starlight instantly filled the entire world. Wherever it went, the soil, rocks, grass, and iron pieces were all corroded by the starlight and became riddled with holes, no longer looking the same as before. The nearest puppet factory was also half destroyed by the force of the explosion. All the arcanists and arcane apprentices hiding inside were directly killed by the sprinkling of starlight. After a while, when the power of the starlight weakened, that Wargen and the fox girl Ruth once again gathered at the edge of the deep pit, whispering to each other in low voices. "Dead. No, he ran away. Damn, I knew he wouldn't be so heroic. Where did he run to?" "Don't worry, I still injected the wolfsbane into his body. I know exactly where he ran to. Come, follow me." The red and black figures quickly disappeared from where they stood. At the back of a building 1,000 meters away, Wizard Harry was ejected from the void, covered in blood. As soon as he came out, he rolled on the ground and desperately took out all kinds of bottles and cans from his waist pouch, pouring them into his mouth with all his might. As he drank, he coughed violently. What he coughed out were purplish-black blood clots and broken internal organs. On his neck, 2 black teeth marks were clearly visible. The surrounding muscles were rotten and sour, and there was a huge, swollen pustule. If it wasn't for the silver wizard robe on his body being too conspicuous, people might really have mistaken him for that strange guy with 2 heads. Damn, damn, damn. Those 2 bastards, why did you come to me of all people? Cough, cough, cough. Grim, Chiolisha, you all deserve to die. I sent out a distress signal for so long, and you didn't even show your faces. Even more deserve to die. If only one of you came, those 2 bastards wouldn't dare to attack me so arrogantly. Bastards, you all deserve to die. The poison that the werewolf injected was clearly a little strange. Normal antidotes were completely ineffective against it. If this place was safe enough, and Wizard Hiri was given an alchemy laboratory, he might really be able to concoct a magic potion that could temporarily restrain the wolfsbane. Unfortunately, this was a foreign plain battlefield that was filled with blood and slaughter. As far as the eye could see, there were battles everywhere, and there was not a single quiet place for people to stay. Wanting to slowly analyze the wolfsbane in such a harsh environment and find a way to counteract it was simply wishful thinking. Moreover, in his vague and vibrating spiritual sense, he could feel two familiar energy presences quickly approaching. He was afraid that in another 7 or 8 seconds they would catch up. Just as Wizard Hiri's heart turned cold, and his heart was already filled with the thought of death, a huge shadow silently shrouded his body. When the fox girl and the werewolf arrived, they only saw blood all over the ground, but no trace of the human wizard. Damn, where is that wizard? Fox girl Ruth's eyes were slightly red, and her fierce gaze carefully swept around the surroundings. He was just here. I didn't sense the presence of teleportation. The werewolf landed on the ground, raised his nose and fiercely sniffed. Wait. I smelled a strange shadow power. That wizard was taken away by a shadow creature. Damn, which bastard dares to steal our prey from our mouths? Chase. Even if we chase them to the ends of the earth, we will drag them out. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.